Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Council Chambers. We're here gathered today for July 2nd, our Governance and Priorities meetings. As you can see, we had a great celebration yesterday to celebrate the 157th birthday of Canada, and what a great celebration it was in the Toronto region. We had pancakes in the morning, we had a lot of kids' activities in Stony Plain, we had a car show on Main Street, and we also had the main stage and fireworks in Spruce Grove, so definitely something for everyone in the region. Members of Council, there is agenda before you. Deputy Mayor, for the motion, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I move that Council adopt the July 2nd, 2024 Governance and Priorities Committee meeting agenda as presented.
Thank you. Administration, anything to add?
Thank you, Your Worship. Nothing to add at this time.
Okay. Members of Council, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. And before we proceed on with our agenda, as the last year we've been transitioning to make sure that we build more capacity within our organization and allow members of Council to chair the the Governance and Priorities meeting, not the other one, just so that we have some more kind of input, allows members of Council to take the opportunity to learn how to chair a meeting and actually get involved a little bit more with the kind of the day-to-day operations of kind of governance in our community. So at this point, I'd like to turn the chair over to Councillor Laurie. Deputy Mayor, it's yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate it. So at this point in our agenda, we have our public input session. This is the time where we allow members of the public to speak to Council about anything that is not on the current agenda. Administration, is there anyone registered this evening to speak?
Through the Deputy Mayor, no, there's been no one registered.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Is there anyone on Council Chambers that would like to speak to Council about anything that is not on the current agenda, other than our illustrious MP who's already seated at the table? And seeing no one present, we will proceed in our agenda. Number 4 is presentations and delegations. This evening, we have 2 presentations. The first one on our agenda, we have our MP, Dane Lloyd. Welcome, and please come forward with your presentation.
And by come forward, I'm sure you mean turn my mic on and continue to sit in this very comfy chair here. Should I speak now?
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. I think we've captured your name, so I don't think we need you to print your name on the sign-in sheet, unless you already have.
Although it's not legible, but anyways.
Excellent. Yes, with these microphones, if you can just make sure you speak directly into the microphone, because if you go off to the side, you completely lose it. And other than that, please proceed.
I will attempt to project. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, Mayor, Council, and officials from the town of Stony Plain. It's excellent opportunity now that Parliament has risen for the summer to come and speak to you about some of the areas that I think might be of interest to the community of Stony Plain and the region. But also, I'm really looking forward to getting feedback from yourselves on things that I can be doing as your federal representative to, bring opportunities to Stony Plain and to pass along any concerns you might have in Ottawa. Just some points that I prepared in advance of today's meeting, some things that I've been working with the town of Stony Plain with and that might be of interest to the community are the Canada Summer Jobs Program. And I know we've worked extensively with the town of Stony Plain and unfortunately the Canada Summer Jobs Program has not been giving Stony Plain what I think is their due credit for the excellent job opportunities you're providing for young people in our community. And this has led to myself and my office having to intervene in the last 2 years to ensure that there will be jobs awarded to Stony Plain. And it's always my goal to prioritize our municipal governments because I think there's really excellent job opportunities for young people to learn about municipal governments, whether it be in, providing services to the community, services to youth, really great job opportunities and learning opportunities, but also to our nonprofit organizations. And then generally I place, our for-profit organizations with the least priority. So we're looking at, for-profit businesses, golf courses, but inevitably, there's a wide variety of businesses, NGOs, and governments that get funding, and I'm very pleased to say that the town of Stony Plain was approved after my intervention for 27 jobs, totaling $56,400 for this summer. So I'm hoping that those positions can be filled. I have no doubt that you have lots of applications to fill those positions, and hoping that the Canada Summer Jobs Program can realize the potential that Stony Plain has to offer for jobs in our community. I know that there's been extensive conversations between myself and members of council and the mayor about the Green and Inclusive Communities Building Program. I inquired with my office, always willing and ready to work with the community to write letters of support when needed, to try to get answers from ministries. And I know we were really hoping for an answer in the fall, and it's my understanding that there's been a delay and that the town has decided to move forward with the rec facility, which I think is excellent. We do need a rec facility. I live in Stony Plain myself, and it's great to see that we're moving forward with this. And it's my understanding that federal government has not been as cooperative with this funding, which I think is very unfortunate. And I think with growing communities like Stony Plain and Spruce Grove, young communities where our age is, we're the youngest communities in Canada, in Alberta, we need facilities like this to provide services for that growing population. So I'll continue to work with the town and a region on trying to ensure that we can get those dollars for our communities. Another issue that's been brought up that I've been working on the Public Safety Committee is the growing issue of car thefts in Canada. And, I think the national media has given this a lot of attention because of the spate of car thefts in communities like Toronto and Ottawa and Montreal. But this is not an issue that's new to the people of Stony Plain in our region. Whether it be catalytic converters or Ford F-350s, cars have been being stolen in our communities for many years, but we have seen a significant spike recently, and I know I've spoken with businesses, especially on the north end of town, that have had a lot of concerns about car thefts, and that they want to ensure that we're getting the resources that we need in our communities through the RCMP to ensure that we're trying to deter those criminal actions. And on the Public Safety Committee, I was pleased to get a lot of feedback from our regional representatives to talk about ways that we can stop. This is organized crime. This is not just petty theft. This is a sophisticated organized crime operation, which is shipping vehicles overseas, which is revinning these vehicles for sale in Canada. And this is an issue that is raising insurance rates on Canadians, on an average of $500 a year on people's insurance premiums at a time that we're living in a cost of living crisis right now. And as you can all see, there are no rental vacancies in communities like Stony Plain. It costs at least $1,000, if that, to get even just a room in our communities, which is shocking from just a few years ago. And affordability is a major challenge in our area. And the last thing that people want to have to pay for is to get a new vehicle or to pay higher insurance premiums. And so, because of our advocacy on this issue, I did a big video about this back in January. The government has started to take action on this. We're seeing some major busts. We're seeing the government starting to buy the X-ray machines to scan the ports. More work needs to be done. We cannot allow our country to be a soft target for vehicle thefts. And we know that these vehicle thefts, it's not an isolated problem. This money is going towards funding gun smuggling into our country, going into funding drugs, and it's going into funding international terrorist groups even, including groups like Hezbollah. So we cannot allow our country to become a donor country for international organized crime. And the fourth and final point, on a lighter note, the King's Coronation Medals, we have just made public. I've been given 20 medals to award to deserving members of our communities here in Sturgeon River Parkland. And I just want to say that we have opened up the nomination process. And I would be really pleased. It is really up to me to make the final call on who these 20 medals will be going forward, but I'm doing this in a very transparent way. It's a very open nomination process, and I'm looking for a wide variety of people from all across our constituency who have demonstrated exceptional leadership and exceptional service in our community, whether it be through nonprofit organizations, municipal government, through our military, through community organizations. I'm looking for a wide variety of people. And so I would encourage, if you on council, because you're the folks who are out there meeting with people each and every day, if you have good candidates that you think should be nominated for the King's Coronation Medal, the King Charles III Coronation Medal, please do encourage folks to nominate on my webpage, and I have more information about that I can share as needed. But you know, that'll be over the next 6 months. I think we'll be closing nominations in December, so there's plenty of time to come up with those nominations if there's any concerns. With that, you know, obviously we're always trying to fight for more infrastructure dollars for Alberta. It's always very frustrating when, you know, the federal government gives an envelope of $5 billion to the province of Alberta, and we spend every single dollar that's available to us. And meanwhile, we have other provinces that will go unnamed at this meeting that get, you know, $10 billion spending envelopes, but they're only able to spend $5 billion. When we know that we could spend every additional federal dollar that's available to create jobs, to create infrastructure here in Alberta, the economic engine of our country. And it's not, when we talk about Alberta being the economic engine of our country, what I'm really talking about is communities like Stony Plain and Parkland County and all the communities that make up the province of Alberta, the industries and the people and the residents. We need to empower them because we are leading the country in economic growth. And that includes a variety of sectors, not just our traditional oil and gas and natural resources sector. And I do want to give, you know, some comfort, I think, because our leader of the official opposition, Pierre Poilievre, has been talking a lot about rewarding communities and punishing communities on the issue of housing. And I want to assure our communities that, you know, smaller communities will not be in any way disadvantaged by a policy that seeks to reward communities for building more houses. What we're talking about is the very large communities across the country that are refusing to get rid of the gatekeepers, to reduce development taxes, to rezone land for more building. We're talking about those communities that are refusing to do that. When we're talking about smaller communities, we know that you know, some communities in our country, especially smaller ones, aren't able to just create more land and zone that land and service that land tomorrow. But for communities, so there will be no disadvantage. There will be no penalties for those communities. But for communities like Stony Plain that do, which we already are leading in housing development in our area, as you can see, town of Spruce Grove, I think, had 10% growth as recently as last year. Those are the communities that are going to be rewarded with additional funding. And that funding will be delivered through mechanisms like the, well, previously called it the gas tax fund. But those mechanisms will be out there to reward communities. And so I think you're going to see a wealth transfer in this country to the communities that are building the houses that are needed to house our extremely fast-growing population in this country. And I think we also, and I know our leaders talked about this, we also need to right-size our immigration in this country to ensure that, you know, we are bringing in immigrants that we need to fill the jobs and fill the needs in our communities, but that these numbers are reflective of what our services can provide. Because we know that in many communities across this country, our schools are overflowing, we don't have enough doctors, we don't have enough hospital spaces, we don't have enough housing, which is readily apparent in many communities across the country, increasingly becoming apparent in communities like Stony Plain, as I said earlier. We need to make sure that those immigration targets reflect the needs and the priorities of our communities. And so I think we have a very bright future ahead of us for Alberta, for Stony Plain, and I'm looking forward to hearing any feedback from you folks on things that we can do to make our community greater than it already is. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, MP Lloyd, for that. So at this point then, I will look to council for any questions on the presentation. Councillor Plechko.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Good evening, Mr. I don't even know how to tell you. I refer to you as Dane most of the time, so it's always a bit complicated when we get into a formal situation. Anyway, today I've got a couple of questions for you. The first one is, how do you right-size immigration? I need you to broaden that S a tiny bit for me.
I think, you know, we've seen issues like the International Students Program, and one particular glaring issue was in Guelph, Ontario, where they increased the enrollment for the first years at their university by 1,500 additional spaces more than they had room in their residencies, which has created a trickle-down effect in the surrounding community where none of the students can actually find any housing off campus because there is no housing on campus. And so what we need to do is do an inventory of how much housing is available in this country, what is the growth of housing in this country, and I think we need to look at things like what is the capacity of our healthcare system, what are the capacity of our schools, and we need to invest in growth, but then we can't just have an immigration system that is detached from the reality on the ground in Canada. And if we're not investing, and if we can't invest or can't build our hospitals and our schools and our housing fast enough, then we can't have an immigration system that is faster, growing faster than we're able to grow those sectors of our economy and our society.
Thank you, and if I could, one more.
Yep, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm looking for a bit of a broad perspective on the your federal government. If you were to take power, we just come from a conference not long ago, and I was very disappointed in the speaker from the federal party in how he addressed municipalities and what they would and wouldn't do with us if they were in power. How are you going to change that aspect that was presented at FCM to be able to actually work with municipalities to see the needs of the municipality and not be a player in the game that really dictates to us?
Thank you. And, we all know that municipalities, as people say, whether people like it or not, really it's provincially mandated legislation. I think it was my colleague Scott Aitchison, who actually sits next to me in the House of Commons, who was our speaker at the conference that you were at. I don't know what he said. I didn't listen to his comments at the conference. But what I can say is that communities that want to grow, that are investing in growth, like communities like Stony Plain, will be better off under a future Conservative government because they will get the additional infrastructure funding needed to meet that growth, and that communities that choose to prioritize, no growth or limited growth or increased taxes on development to prevent housing growth are communities that are not going to be rewarded, and in fact might even see some of their federal funding be pulled back. Now, I understand that there's mitigating circumstances in many cases, and I'm sure those will have to be taken into account. Sensitive environmental areas in our community, we don't want to be building just for the sake of building, and we don't want to be destroying things that have certain value in our communities. But we also have to understand that we do need housing, and that's what people are demanding. When I go door knocking in the communities and people tell me that I sold my house in Stony Plain and I was hoping to buy another house, and I'm priced out of the market. I can't afford to live in my own community. And I know that's no fault of the town council here in Stony Plain. It's the economy, but we as a federal party and as hopefully a federal government are going to do everything we can to ensure that we get that money focused on building so that we can support these young families going in the future.
Thank you.
Excellent. Other questions? Mayor Choi.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you, MP Lloyd, for coming and presenting and taking your valuable time. I think it is, as being a MP, you're not in the constituency very much because you're all the way in Ottawa, but definitely appreciate the time that you do take when you're here. I just want to follow up on the question that was asked by Councilor Ptashko in terms of, rewarding communities for growth and stuff. And you said, I'm trying to figure out how that's going to work if that does come into effect, because I think we have a provincial government that passed legislation that the federal government can't deal with municipalities. Mm-hmm. So how, if the federal government wants to reward municipalities for growing and punish ones for not, then how do you bypass the provincial government, which says they can't talk to us?
Proof is going to be in the pudding. The communities that are growing, it's going to be readily available to be seen that they're growing. And I mean, the federal government has their own spending power. And so, they will approve the funding. And I think it's important that we recognize that the system of federalism that we've seen over the past 9 years, and I'm going to try to avoid throwing the current government under the bus as much as I can, but you all know my thoughts on the current government. But I think the sort of federalism that we've seen has created this significant pushback amongst many of the provinces, where you see a province like the province of Quebec negotiated deal with the federal government that, similar to the deal that I think the province of Alberta is pushing for, that no federal dollars can be spent unless it's directly approved by the provincial government. And I think if we see a consistent system of federalism applied across the country that's more cooperative with the provinces, then I think we'll see a lot less problems between our federal and provincial governments.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Councillor Hanser.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Mr. Lloyd, I'm very pleased that you're here with us. We've seen a lot of you this week at the Philippine Third Celebration and at your barbecue. So it's wonderful to have you here. I wanted to say, the minute I start seeing opportunities for municipalities to benefit with relationship and dollars coming from the federal government, and then we see a pushback coming from our own province, it gives me great concern because we can't possibly get all that we need from the provincial government. Every single taxpayer also pays taxes to the federal government. My question is, do we not have a right to petition and ask for, and in some ways expect, some support for our communities from the federal government? And so that's a conflict that has got the communities and the people in the communities sort of hamstrung and to no good benefit. I always wonder, is that a preparation for separation from Canada? And I know that sounds a little out there to some people. Doesn't sound so far out there for me, because it just doesn't make any sense. Why would anybody stand in the way of us being able to work with our members of parliament to petition for help to do things like build our rec center? We haven't had a sporting facility built in Stony Plain for over 50 years. It's time. It's well past time. So it is an important opportunity we have as council to try to work with you, and I don't want anybody getting in the middle of that. The thing that I'm wondering is, have you all in the federal government thought of a way around these things with the provinces, or to work with the provinces to get them to tone that down so that we can access and receive dollars for our community, because we need that money?
And, I don't disagree with you. I don't want to inadvertently put myself into a sort of a situation where I'm getting in between political personalities or parties, especially on an issue that I'll fully admit that I don't fully understand. And I don't know the internal conversations that you've been having between the provincial government and maybe with the federal government. I only know what I've worked with you on, and I will say that my door is always open, and I have had an ongoing dialogue with members of the council about the rec center, and I can assure you of my unmitigated support to get federal funding for the rec center, but I'm unaware of any other conversations that have been done around that. I would say, I guess speculating on it, I suspect it could be collateral damage in terms of a very scorched earth approach when you have a federal government that has its priorities that might not necessarily align with the priorities of Alberta or the Alberta government. And having a government that has shown itself willing to go around, I think, is creating this pushback that we're seeing right now. And I think that when we have a much more cooperative, I anticipate after the next election, when we have a much more cooperative understanding between the federal and provincial governments, that we'll see the temperature go down significantly. And I think we certainly recognize the important contribution of our municipalities, and we want to ensure, as as a representative of this region, we want to ensure that our communities are getting their fair share, because, as you said, there is only one taxpayer. The same person who's paying their municipal taxes in Stony Plain, as I do, is the person paying their provincial income taxes, the same person paying their federal GST and income taxes. And we want to ensure that every single resident of Sturgeon River Parkland, whether that be Spruce Grove, Stony Plain, or Parkland, is getting every single federal dollar that they're entitled to, whether that be to build the roads, that be to support our healthcare system, our schools. And my goal is to ensure that we get every penny that we're entitled to in our region. So.
Excellent, thank you very much. Any other questions? Mayor Choi, go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And MP Lloyd, just a quick question here. As you know, as we build our communities and we look forward to the future, I noticed the RCMP community policing contract with the provinces expires in 2023. Definitely, there a little while ago, there was a push from the provincial government regarding a better police force. Some of that rumblings came from the fact that there was some understanding or maybe some undercurrent that the RCMP are considering not contracting community policing in the future. Can you comment on that? Because if there is some validity to that, as a good council, we need to prepare for that when that does expire.
Not that all the questions have been great, but I would encourage members of the committee who are concerned with this issue to reference the National Security Committee of Parliamentarians, the NSICOP, which is basically, they're in the news quite a lot lately over foreign interference. But they recently just completed a report on the RCMP, and I know there are some redactions, but I would encourage members to read that report because the National Security Committee of Parliamentarians made it quite clear that based upon their extensive investigation that there are concerns that people don't believe the RCMP is capable of providing the level of service that are needed across this country. And I don't want to speak for the report in its entirety, but there is a definite movement to move towards a federal policing model, whereby the RCMP is much like the FBI in the United States and focuses on federal policing. And so I think you will see continued policing services provided to, the territories, Northwest Territories, Yukon, and Indigenous policing, and certain high-level, international drug trafficking and things like that, much like the FBI, and that the provinces would have to take on a larger role in policing to fill that gap. I'm not saying that's a definitive thing, but that seems to be the direction that things are heading in this country. And I know, our municipalities, I've heard loud and clear, have concerns about that because we know, I think the community's taxes have already had to go up to take into account the increased costs of policing. I know it's a significant cost pressure on our predominantly rural communities in provinces like Alberta that have enjoyed certain level of support from the federal government in terms of providing, I think, 10 to 20% of the cost of RCMP policing. But I suspect it doesn't really matter which government is in charge. I suspect that as those contract negotiations come up, that there's going to be a movement away from that. I've lost my train of thought here, but it's, one thing we did fight for with the provincial government, I think it was under the previous Public Safety Minister, Marco Mendicino, is we knew that this was going to create a significant cost difference for our municipalities, and I believe the federal government suspended the requirement for payments a number of years ago, which did save, I think, Alberta municipalities about $35 million in costs. And so that was due to the advocacy of a lot of our rural Alberta MPs who are pushing the government on that. But I do think our communities have to get prepared for the possible eventuality that the current policing model will not be sustained.
Okay, thank you for your comment and your kind of suggestions and kind of what, like I said, you hear things more than we do because you're in Ottawa, and definitely appreciate that. I just want, on my behalf, just thank you for the work that you've done in terms of advocacy as we applied for the rail safety grant for a second pedestrian overpass, and also, as you mentioned, the Green Initiative infrastructure project that we applied for as well. We didn't receive any of those, but we definitely appreciate your advocacy there and your help, and we look forward to your support when we reapply for those programs, and then definitely for the Canada Summer Grants program. I think that saves the town about 1.5% in taxes that comes back through the jobs program, allows us to hire a lot of summer workers for the year. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing no more questions, I just have a few quick comments because most of the questions I had have been asked, so appreciate that. Again, I'll just echo a lot of what was said in regards to the federal dollars flowing through to municipalities. Obviously, we appreciate the advocacy and the role that you play in that, and understanding that, you know, there's only one taxpayer, and we want to make sure that those dollars are coming back to Alberta and to Albertans in any way possible, and that we're benefiting from all the federal programs and funding that's available and accessible to us. I think you said it best. It's best when all levels of government are cooperative and collaborative, and definitely look forward to an opportunity as to when we can have all levels of government being cooperative and collaborative, because that's the best that we're going to get for our residents here. Just again, wanted to highlight the Canada Summer Jobs Grant. I know Mayor Choi just talked about it. Not only the town, but I know many organizations within our community also benefit from that, like our Red Brick Common, I believe the Pioneer Museum as well. And so it's wonderful when we see those programs able to be accessed by those organizations, because we know that, again, they struggle at times to have the amount of funding they need in order to maintain their status in our community, and it's fantastic when we can see that. Other than that, again, just highlighting the King's Coronation Medal. I think you mentioned all the information is on your website, so encouraging our residents to make sure that they hop on there. We have many wonderful people in the community, and I'm sure you'll receive a lot of nominations, and you'll probably have a very tough time going through all of those and making some very hard decisions, but I'm sure there'll be some very deserving people who are awarded that. With that, it's always a pleasure to have you in our chambers, and thank you so much for representing Stony Plain and our interests in Ottawa. I know it's not an easy job, but we appreciate everything that you do for us. And I do understand that you'd like to have a picture with council before you head out this evening. And so I will just ask that we take a brief recess so that we can make that happen before you're on your way. So with that, council, we'll just meet in front of the bench. Thank you very much, and welcome everybody back here. Appreciate the presentation we just received from MP Lloyd. With that, we'll move on to item number 4.2, the CIBC Wood Gundy Economic and Investment Presentation. I understand our presenters are joining us virtually this evening, and so I'd like to welcome our guests, and I'd like to turn it over to administration for an introduction.
Thank you, and good evening, Deputy Mayor and Council. This evening, as we have on our screen, we have James Hobson and Sheree Shahal, Certified Financial Advisors from CIBC Wood Gundy, joining us. The pair of advisors manage the town's investment portfolio and will be presenting an update on investment performance, economic climate, and investment portfolios.
Excellent. Thank you very much, and welcome to Chambers virtually. And I'd like to turn it over to you for your presentation.
Well, thank you very much for having us, and good evening, Deputy Mayor and Council. I think what's really interesting, we're coming here tonight to give you an economic update. A couple of the key points that we have here were already brought up by the previous speaker, and I think they are pertinent. So I hope what we can do here is kind of just give you some of the data that helps back up a couple of those major issues facing our communities. So I'll just jump right into it here. So I think the key here, unless you've been living under a rock, the Bank of Canada a couple of weeks ago cut interest rates for the first time from 5% to 4.75% in June. Essentially what's happening is the Bank of Canada has basically run out of excuses as to why they've kept the interest rate at 5% for so long. If you look here, it just kind of tells quite a interesting story of during the COVID pandemic, interest rates being cut to near zero. We had massive amounts of fiscal stimulus and those supply chain bottlenecks, which created that huge spike up of inflation. That's that red line there. So naturally, what we would expect is the Bank of Canada raised interest rates at the fastest, sharpest pace on record to try and bring inflation back down to earth. So I think if you can take anything from this presentation, it's just that the whole narrative of rising rates, rampant, persistent inflation, and supply chain issues, that's kind of all now shifted to a narrative of slowing growth. Although, as our previous speaker mentioned, Alberta is going to fare much better than the rest of the provinces, so that's good. Slowing growth, cooler inflation, and lower interest rates. And all of these things are interrelated. So we're going to kind of walk you through how each of those kind of contribute. Now, this here just to illustrate how dramatic this period has been and how difficult it's been to kind of be anyone managing fixed income investments. This graph just shows you the interest rate we get on 30-year debt and 2-year debt being the blue lines. So essentially it impacts the rates we can invest at and the rates we can borrow at. Just a couple of key points to note on that front. As you can see, we saw the overnight rate, that 2-year number peak at 5%, has come down materially over the past, say, year or so. Same with that 30-year bonds, so our lending rates, the rates that impact our mortgages and our long-term infrastructure funding, those rates are starting to come down as well. The other thing to point out on this graph is in the middle of sort of 2022, those two graphs crossed, and what we'd refer to that as the yield curve inverted. All that really signals to us from an economic standpoint is that the market is pricing in a slowdown of growth going forward. It's no longer anticipating sort of super hot growth that was fueled by this fiscal stimulus and low interest rates. The market switched, and now we're seeing sort of a slowdown, not just in Alberta, not just Canada, but globally. So again, just when it comes to inflation, this shows you kind of where we are relative to our peers. So that dark red line, that's Canadian inflation. You can see kind of peaking around 8%, sort of in the mid of 2022. Latest inflation readings coming in sort of the high twos. So the latest headline reading was 2.9%. Came out slightly higher than expected, but essentially that general trend of the overall pace of inflation has done what we told you a year ago it was going to do, and it's started to come back down to that Bank of Canada's 2% target. So again, they're running out of excuses as to why you have this overnight rate at 5%, again, which is why they've started cutting interest rates. So the previous speaker mentioned this, and this just kind of illustrates it from an economic standpoint. This shows you the inflation rate in Canada with that dotted line there is if you exclude shelter. Sorry, so the shelter component of inflation is what's keeping it high right now. This is more of a policy issue. This isn't something we can change from our sort of investment standpoint, but creating enough homes for people to live in is basically the biggest challenge that we're still facing in terms of getting that inflation number back down towards 2%. That red line there is what the inflation rate is if we strip out shelter. We're already below the Bank of Canada's, so sub 2% inflation if we strip out shelter. So that's really good news if we're sort of thinking about the long-term expenses that our municipality is going to face. We're not as concerned about rampant run-ups in prices over the next couple of years. But that shelter number has to come down, and Chart's going to walk you through kind of what's going into that right now. The other thing to mention, so the biggest question we're getting right now is, why has the Bank of Canada cut interest rates, but America still hasn't? The US has still kept their interest rate where it is. The main reason for that is the mortgage structure. So in the US, people can lock into 30-year fixed rate mortgages. So essentially, once I buy my house, I don't care what happens with the overnight interest rate. My payments are locked in, and it's not going to impact me too much. But in Canada, most people are on the sort of 5 to 7 year fixed reset mortgages, where you are having to refinance now at materially higher interest rates. So because of that mechanism, Canadians are much more exposed to the sort of the pain of higher interest rates than our US counterparts. Again, which is why the US will probably move slower than Canada when it comes to sort of cutting interest rates over the next couple of years. This chart here is supposed to look complicated. This is sort of the volatility that we're seeing in the data. This one here just shows you US producer prices. But essentially, all this is just to illustrate, there's a lot of noise in the weekly, monthly data. So I think as sort of long-term strategic planners, the best thing you can do is just kind of block out those sort of temporary spikes or running hot in terms of inflation, because it's probably just transitory at this point. We are still seeing that general trend of slower growth, lower inflation, lower interest rates. And why is that the case? Unfortunately for Canada, our economy is growing, it's underperforming our peers, particularly that yellow line, that's the US economy, just showing real GDP kind of indexed back to 2019. So since the pandemic, the US economy has done really well. Unemployment is low, growth is high, and it's sort of the reverse in Canada. We're that dark blue line where essentially growth is kind of sputtered out, and we're seeing rates in the low 1% range for growth for the country as a whole. Again, reiterating that story of sort of faster growth in the South. So the question becomes, can we cut our interest rates faster than the US without really hurting our currency? When it comes to employment, this is also kind of interesting from a municipal standpoint as well. Canada's unemployment is rising more than our counterparts in the US, UK, and the Eurozone. You can see this just shows you the blue is the post-pandemic low, so sort of the best employment situation we've had since the pandemic started, and then the most recent readings. You can see in Canada, the best unemployment number we got to was 4.8% unemployment. That's already shot way back up to 6.1%. So the point here is that Canadians have already felt the pain of higher interest rates. We're starting to see, Chart's going to walk you through some of the signs we're seeing overall, but again, just hammers home that point of in Canada, we're going to need to start cutting interest rates, whether Bank of Canada likes to or not, versus the US, they're still seeing relatively robust jobs numbers. And then if we want to get more granular, this just kind of strips out public and private employment. All this to illustrate that where we've seen the growth in employment numbers over the past couple of years has been in the public sector, and the private sector there has pretty much stagnated. So we're not seeing a lot of new hiring coming in the private sector jobs. So again, it just bodes well for not having such stringent monetary policy. We don't need to have financial conditions this tight because the job growth is not as fast in the private sector. Chart, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, James. So James kind of alluded to a couple things here, right? So we have slower growth in Canada. We have employment issues in Canada relative to our peers and our counterparts. So when we look at Canadian data today, when I walk you through the latter half of this presentation, I want to highlight a couple things. And one is obviously the impact of higher rates and understanding why we at CIBC Economics believe that essentially the stage has been set unintentionally to allow the Bank of Canada essentially start cutting rates before the US, as we just saw them do their first quarter point hike, and frankly be significantly more aggressive than our US counterparts south of the border as well in terms of when it comes to a rate cutting cycle. And the Coles Notes versions, I'll give you a spoiler here. It's essentially we've run out of time. We have to start cutting rates in Canada versus the US. But a starting point that we can look at from an economic data standpoint is excess savings, because excess savings was one of the primary factors that essentially kept inflation pretty high and stopped inflation from coming down for a lot longer, which made us raise rates for longer than we thought we were going to. Well, if you guys can kind of look at the chart that you're looking at here, Q1 of 2020, we saw the ratio of household wealth to consumption, so a significant amount of savings spike, and then that drawdown come materially as the impact of inflation and the bite of inflation was felt across households. So what this essentially showed us is that the forecast is, it's no rocket science here, for weaker spending ahead as consumers simply have less excess discretionary spending income in their day-to-day lives anymore. So from the first data point standpoint, what caused the inflation, excess savings and low interest rates, essentially consumers have run out of money, they've run out of savings. Now, the next important data set for us to look at is Canadian household debt, because as you guys can see, household debt service ratio in Canada is climbing high and only forecast to go higher. Not only have individuals spent their excess savings, but any of their income that they have left over now is essentially going more and more and more towards their debt payments. Debt service has increased materially over the years. This is the data point that essentially shows you why this interest rate cycle was significantly worse than the interest rate cycle that we had in the late 90s, the 1996 interest rate double-digit mortgage situation, because relatively consumers just have significantly more debt here in Canada. And so where's this forecast to go? Obviously, it's going to forecast to increase as well. And some of the early signs that we've kind of seen in that debt service, kind of the first triggers that we look at from a interest rate cycle perspective, is delinquencies in what we call consumer loan categories. So the blue line there, blue graph there shows you 2021 Q4 before the first interest rate hike. And then the gray bar shows you kind of where we are currently at. And what you can kind of see is the autos and credit card loans. We've had a material, I'm using the word material increase in delinquencies of consumer loans, which is essentially the first ones to go. Everybody doesn't want to default on their mortgage payments, so that's the last piece of debt they'll kind of look at. But from the early strides of stress income that we've seen, auto loans, credit card debt, other consumer loans, we've seen that delinquency start to increase. The important data is set for us to look at today is kind of that fourth column, mortgages, and what the impact on this rising rate environment is going to be for mortgages. Because once we look at the debt service cost from a mortgage perspective, we'll look at it from a supply perspective from housing to get a better sense of where we kind of see that housing market going forward. So let's take a look at that kind of second last column there, mortgages, and dig a little deeper. So the Bank of Canada is going to have to cut more than the market's currently expecting to stimulate the economy. So what we're showing here is the red bars that you're looking at is where the market is currently pricing in interest rate cuts. With and they are forecasting for a good amount of interest rate cuts to come from the Bank of Canada. However, it's not enough. So what this shows you is even with what the market's expecting, in 2024, that's going to be a 20% increase to people's monthly mortgage payments if the market is right. If the market is right, next year, it's an over 20% increase to people's monthly mortgage payments. And then 2026, a 25% increase to individuals' monthly mortgage payments. So a massive massive hit to individual consumers' mortgages, and honestly monthly income when one, we're out of spending and out of excess savings that we just shown, to consumer loans, other consumer loans have already started to go delinquent. So if we take a look at that and pair it with what our CIBC forecast is, which is the gray bar, that's an interesting comparison to look at, because that gray bar may look like an aggressive interest rate cutting cycle compared to what the market is pricing in. But what we can tell you is that if CIBC is correct and that's how aggressive the interest rates start to cut, one, not only is it still a material increase to individuals' monthly mortgage payments as a minimum of 10%, but that also shows you what the gray bar is, what's needed to just simply avoid a recession, let alone have growth. So just to keep the economy stagnant to where it currently is, that's what's needed in the gray bar. The red bar, which is what the market's currently pricing in, is nowhere close to that. So we have a long way to go before we can start stimulating the economy again because of the impact to consumers. So this chart essentially shows us percentage change in monthly mortgage payments. But now we need to start looking at how many consumers are actually going to be affected by this. If I say only 10 of us are going to be affected and have a monthly increase of 0.25% or 25%, that's less relevant. But let's look at how many of Canadian mortgages have yet to see the full hit from higher debt service costs. So a lot of data on here, but I'll give you a couple key interesting statistics. By the end of 2024, over 60% of Canadian mortgages are going to be subject to the higher rate environment that we're currently in. And by the end of 2025, that number goes above 80%. I can tell you that 2025 mortgage number is materially front loaded. Last time I saw the data set, it was 71% of Canadian mortgages will be subject to the higher rate environment by the first quarter of next year. So not only is it going to be a material impact in rise in rate hikes in monthly payments, but the quantity of individuals that are going to be subject to this rate payment increase is material as well. Why that's important, if I go back a slide here real quick, why that's very important is you guys can look at 2025, the red bar. The market's not pricing this in right now. They're just going, okay, well, we think that there's going to be some cuts coming. We don't know when. And the market generally looks at the front of the cycle. That's why you can see kind of 2024 and 2023 have been relatively close, and then you get greater disparity as it kind of goes along the line there. But the market's not pricing this in. If the market is accurate, by the end of Q1 next year, that is a massive impact to the individual consumer. So what this shows us is essentially there's a lot of people that are not going to be able to afford the mortgages they're in. Why this is important from a housing price perspective, economists like to say that interest rate cycles don't generally decrease the value of houses materially. Forced selling does, because what that does is it increases the amount of supply into the market over what's currently forecast. So that's what we could kind of see come into 2025 on a Canadian national average. Alberta's kind of an inverse economy in a pocket that we've kind of seen, let alone immigration, but we've seen a significant amount of migration come to Alberta as people start to get priced out of homes in Ontario and BC. They're coming to Alberta because of our housing is significantly more affordable and our cost of living is significantly more affordable. So this data set, if I were to guess, is more impactful for BC and Ontario, but still impactful for Canada as a whole. So that's kind of mortgages and the impact of the current rising rate environment on the individual consumer. I'm going to pivot for a little second here to take a look at the rate forecast between what the Canada's current rate forecast is and the US's rate forecast. The reason I want to do this is James kind of alluded to it, is one of the questions that we see quite a lot is, can we be more aggressive? Okay, sure, the data says that we have to be more aggressive, but one, can we be more aggressive? And two, what's going to be the impact if we are more aggressive than the US? Because if we cut rates faster than they do, naturally the US currency will start to rise materially, and then it's going to have trickle-on effects, which will just keep inflation persistent as well. So the first one that I want to look at is, if we actually, consumers and economists are always kind of subject to a little bit of a recency bias here. Going all the way back to 2005, we haven't seen a material divergence between the US Fed fund rate and the Canadian overnight Fed fund rate. So a lot of the time when we're looking at this data, we go, hey, we can't actually shift because we've never seen it before. It's not exactly accurate. If we actually look at data set going all the way back to 1992, the US Feds and the Canadian Bank of Canada has changed policies and had materially different policies throughout the various economic interest rate cycles. So This bar just kind of shows you, can we diverge from them, and have we diverged from them in the past? Absolutely we have, but obviously history is significantly different than current economic environments. What happened in 97 is materially different than what's happening now. So let's look at what the forecast is showing us and what the model is showing us for how far we can actually diverge from the US Feds when it comes to interest rates and what the impact is going to be. So this kind of shows you that on the bottom x-axis there, every 25 basis point cut difference that we have between the US and Canadian policy rates, what the impact is going to be essentially on inflation, because the more we deviate, the more it's going to impact inflation, which just persists the problem that we're trying to solve for in the first place. The most important data set here that you're looking at is between that 0.7, that 75 basis points and that 100 basis points number. What the data shows us is we can deviate by almost a full percentage point without materially impacting inflation right now, given what's happened in the Canadian economic environment, without impacting inflation. This is very important because it gives us room to essentially deviate from US policy without overly impacting our currency rates over the long term. So given what's happened, have we deviated before? Yes. Do we have the ability to deviate materially? I wouldn't say too materially, but we can deviate between 75 basis points to 100 basis points without causing too much of an impact. I like that personally because the forecast isn't for us to start cutting rates and the US to never cut rates. There's just going to be a lag effect. We're cutting before them, and then they're forecast to cut kind of end of this year when their inflation starts to come back down to earth. So from this standpoint, it just gives us runway to start cutting before them until they can start catching back up and get back within that tolerance level that we expect them to be. So overall, from a currency, it's not going to impact the currency as much as people think it's going to, given what we've had. Now, James touched on this. We did see the previous presenters speak on this a little bit. Well, what I'll try and do now is kind of quantify some of that data that we've seen as well. So there's evidence of the population growth has been boosting housing costs. Obviously, when we have a significant amount of immigration in Alberta, so a significant amount of migration, that's probably not going anywhere anytime soon. Not only housing prices going up, rent prices, rent inflation is going up materially as well. You can kind of see where Alberta sits relative to the average of percentage change in population. So everybody's feeling that bite of rent inflation. Now, on the right-hand side there are new measures that are in place to help, when I'm going to use the word tame population growth. So where that, you guys can see where we have been as a percentage year-over-year increase in population growth versus where we're forecast to be based on the new policies that are in place going forward. Now, yes, that looks like a material drop in population growth, but the question then becomes is it enough? Again, how much is that going to impact us? So slowing population growth is going to help, but it's not going to fully solve housing affordability by itself. So if we actually forecast population growth and model it out, we can actually see that what we can actually see is that the market is materially undersupplied. And what we mean by that is if we look at the left-hand side there, 2024, the market is materially undersupplied. So this is the cumulative underbuilding we've seen since 2016 based on the population growth projections. So 600,000 homes undersupplied in Canada right now, as it currently is. A lot of things going into that. Primarily, you guys probably see it as well. A lot of developers out there sitting on large parcels of land, reluctant to start building as interest rate costs are significantly higher. So as interest rates start to come down, we're going to see that 2024 number come down. However, as I kind of alluded to, slowing population growth isn't going to solve that. So if we take that current population growth number on the right-hand side, that current forecast, and show a material decrease, model it out, and project it against demand, we can see that on that first gray bar there is the unchanged pace of housing stock addition. So if the market doesn't change how much houses it's currently putting on, you can see that we're still well undersupplied. We're underbuilding by 400,000 homes. And let's stress test it all the way out to kind of forecasting it to the end of 2026. There's still going to be a 100,000 home a year underbuilding pace And that's always when you have a pace of underbuilding relative to demand, it's a lag and it's hard to catch up and keep up because you can't just simply pop in a bunch of homes tomorrow. One, it takes time from a construction completion lag. Two, the amount of qualified labor from a construction standpoint is materially lower as well. We don't have the labor and we currently don't have the supply. So yes, population is coming down. Yes, interest rates are coming down. However, it's not going to fully solve the population, the housing affordability forecast by itself. It's going to help it, but not fully wipe it away. So the data we can't hide from the data essentially. Then the other one that the Bank of Canada has to kind of balance, and I don't envy them for having to balance this. It's a hard equation to kind of do. Is managing population growth it's a delicate balancing act. On one side, immigration, as we kind of saw, helps fill job needs, as our previous kind of presenter hit on as well. So it helps fill those labor market needs and fill those vacancies. But on the other side, it impacts housing affordability. So you're kind of walking a razor's edge. It's a give and take right now. And obviously, housing affordability is materially outpacing the benefits of the labor market needs. So we need to kind of see that come into balance. But we always need to remember in the back of our minds that you can't just pull one lever without affecting the other. They are going to have an inverse correlation there. So just something to keep in mind for yourselves as well. Now, a lot of economic data. How is Alberta going to fare? Myself and James, we were in front of you a year ago. We're here with you today. You know we're eternal optimists. Yes, things are expensive, but I will find a way to put a positive spin on absolutely everything. Alberta is going to lead all of our peers in terms of economic growth in 2024 and 2025. 2.2% real GDP growth in Alberta relative to the 1% Canadian national average. And then 2.5% into next year ahead of the national average of 1.6%. Yes, growth is slower, but obviously Alberta is going to be one of the leaders of all the provinces out there, largely driven by commodities, housing, things like that, which are helping drive our growth here in Alberta. So Alberta is still expected to be a front runner. We went through a significant amount of years where commodity prices were depressed. We didn't have demand. We were essentially the whipping boy for quite some time. Now we're on the other side of that, and we're starting to pull our weight in terms of driving that national average in terms of real growth. So Alberta faring well relative to our peers. Now, we've started to cut interest rates. Yes, Alberta is going to do good. We've started to cut interest rates. We know housing populations are going to go higher. Inflation is coming down. It's all well and good. Now, the other question is, what's the new normal? So when I say what's the new normal, that's more so for the demographic that is myself or James, the demographic that hasn't seen high interest rates from a housing cost perspective for a very long time. Our generation has been very fortunate to have what I would call low interest rates. Even with a forecasted interest rate to come around, let's say mortgage rates around 4.5%, relative to the long-term average, it's still cheaper debt than what individuals are used to seeing. So what this data is essentially showing us is that we have to stay higher for longer. The Bank of Canada neutral rate is essentially what rate would the Bank of Canada have to keep interest rates without without causing recession, without trying to curb inflation, or without stimulating the economy. So literally neutral rate without stimulating or detracting from the economy. And then the overnight rate is kind of where we sit there. So you can kind of see going back to 2005, we've always been under the neutral rate because inflation has actually been very hard to get for the better part of 20 years. It's very housing inflation, housing inflation, car inflation, food inflation has been lower than that 2% target. A lot has changed in the world in the last couple of years. We have what's called deglobalization on south of the border. I will use that as buy American, build domestic, things like that. You have a deglobalization trend that's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. And post-COVID, we went from pre-COVID, it was a just-in-time inventory, so you want to keep your inventory minimal, to now it's a just-in-case inventory because we don't want to not have inventory when it's needed. So all that essentially does is make inflation a lot stickier. So what this shows us is we're going to have to be higher for longer. I personally like that because it allows those who have had cheap interest rate cycles for a better part of their careers know that even at a 4.5%, 5% mortgage rate perspective, it's still cheap interest rate debt. The days of 2% or sub 2% mortgage rates are long gone. And as James had a slide at the start there, the Canadian market is significantly more sensitive to interest rates than our US parts because we have to reset into the mortgage rates a lot earlier than they do. I like that because it protects the value of our assets. We go through a lot more shocks in our asset values versus the asset bubbles and credit bubbles that can be built up when you have these 30-year fixed rate mortgage situations. So a lot of the data in the presentation today, but I will leave you with the most important piece. Where is interest rates forecast to go? At the top of the line there, you can see that the current overnight rate for Bank of Canada is sitting at 4.75%. That was kind of the first free cut interest rate. Inflation has started to come down that the Bank of Canada has done. We kind of touched on it today. They've run out of room. They have to start cutting rates before our US counterparts. We believe that they're going to continue with, in the CIBC forecast, 3 more rate cuts this year, going down to 4%. But if you look at all the way to the right there, ending next year at 2.75%. So an aggressive interest rate cutting cycle well into next year. On the lower part there, the U.S. interest rate cycle, they're sitting at 5.375. Their first cut not coming till Q4 of this year. But then again, when they start cutting, it's going to be an aggressive rate cutting cycle as well. And you can look at all the way into December, end of next year, ending at 3.625. The last piece is I touched on the impact to currency. At the bottom left there, the currency rate is sitting around 1.3, I believe it's 1.367 as of this morning, so rounded to 1.37. You can kind of see what that forecast is going to be on the short term. Yes, the value of the US dollar will increase slightly going into the end of the year, but the forecast is for it to come back down within that 1% tolerance range, tying it back to the US dollar well into next year. Because as I said, we're not going to deviate from them for long. We're just going to deviate from them from the short term. So overall, inflation is coming down, interest rates is coming down, and the impact that we've seen for quite some long time here is finally shaken out. I believe last year when we were in front of you guys, we were essentially coming in going, we're at the peak. We believe we're near the peak. The pain is behind us. We just have to wait. Well, the waiting has come, and we're finally starting to see the impact of, okay, rates have started to come down. With that, I will stop and open the floor up for any questions if you guys have them.
Excellent. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your very detailed presentation. And with that, I will look to council to see if we have any questions. Councillor Loynes.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just for clarification on the spreadsheet that you're showing us right now, it says it's 2024 March, then to June 2025. Just to confirm, that is supposed to be 2025 March for all three.
Great catch. Yes, I'm going to give that feedback to our economics team.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Mayor Choi.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and thank you for the presentation, gentlemen. That was very informative. I guess this is kind of thinking out loud. Definitely, we know that there is a housing crisis within Canada, that we do not have enough houses that to accommodate the people that are here. So in terms of that, wouldn't it be more beneficial to have the federal government drop the interest rates, or the Bank of Canada drop interest rates considerably, so that it spurs on more development, so as the builders can borrow dollars at a cheaper rate to build more houses and therefore increase that supply versus keeping it high?
I think the short answer to your question is yes. If rates come down, there's more access to credit, which is more access to building homes. I think the persistent issue, though, is that even with significantly more development, say we showed you that graph, if you added 100,000 more homes per year, by the end of 2026, we're still in a huge deficit based on the population trends. So I think that kind of overwhelming force is going to offset much of sort of what you're talking about in terms of the the interest rates impact on home building.
Thank you. Anything else?
Yep. So a follow-up to that, in terms of, you mentioned earlier in a slide that the Canadian economy is not doing as well and it's not recovering as well as the U.S. economy. In terms of, would a lower interest rate spur on that economy as well, so we can play catch up until the federal government in the U.S. lowers their rates?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes. So when you lower interest rates, generally it's stimulative for the economy. So you would expect, so the Bank of Canada, they're smarter than us for sure. And they see the growth already slowing. They recognize the need. It's not a maybe anymore. It's we have to act. We have to lower interest rates because our growth is starting to stagnate pretty significantly. And the inflation numbers, again, if you strip out shelter, we're sub 2%. So there's really no reason for them to have what we would call now is restrictive monetary policy. Having that rate at 5% is way too restrictive for the majority of Canadians who are sitting on, renewing mortgages, credit card debt, line of credit debt, things like that. So yeah, the U.S. is much hotter than us right now. So yeah, again, I think Canada needs those lower interest rates if we're going to see growth kind of rebound. Great point.
Just to add to what James is saying as well, he kind of hit it on the head there where, yes, it is really beneficial to start cutting interest rates, which is why we've seen the Bank of Canada do their first quarter point hike. What's also important for everybody to remember is we're not saying go back to like the 2% or free debt levels. It's just start cutting rates to a more normal, non-restrictive piece. Yes, higher for longer, but don't penalize the economy because we've run out of room. You guys have heard economics and the news probably use the word soft landing. The soft landing is where you can kind of start lowering interest rates or raising rates enough just so that you slow growth but not cause negative growth and cause a recession in the economy. So you're just trying to hit that soft landing. In the US, that runway is significantly longer. In Canada, it's significantly shorter because how sensitive we are to interest rates. So yeah, exactly what James said. Absolutely, it's going to be beneficial to start cutting that.
Any more, Mayor Choi?
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just my last question. In terms of, you mentioned earlier that definitely the mortgage structure is different for residential homes in Canada versus the U.S. Majority of the Canadian homes are kind of amortized over 25 or 30 years, but they usually have a 3 to 5 year renewal process. So from what I've heard and what you presented, then with these higher interest rates, then who's it actually benefiting?
So that's a great question. Like, why would they do it in the first place? The problem is, if you keep monetary policy really stimulative the whole time, you're going to create rampant inflation, right? So it's a delicate balancing act between making sure prices aren't going up so much that mom and dad can't afford groceries anymore, because that's going to be an offset to like, okay, now her interest rates on her mortgage are too high. So over the last couple of years, it's almost been a double whammy, right? We've had high inflation and high interest rates. So, the average Joe is not, feeling as confident as they were sort of 2 years ago. So that's why we're seeing, rates start to come down. Char, do you want to add anything to that?
Okay, and I appreciate that, that feedback. I just want one more comment before you leave here, Deputy Mayor. In terms of what you said about keeping rates higher to prevent rampant inflation, but through one of your charts earlier, you said that inflation is actually negative now, back to below 2%. The only reason is higher is shelter. So is there a possibility of Bank of Canada splitting the rates in terms of shelter housing, have a different rate than the normal Bank of Canada rate for non-housing borrowing?
So everything is going to be priced off of just that one overnight rate that they set there. Yeah. Char, do you have anything kind of to add to that? I don't really have anything.
Yeah. So, Denver, it's important to remember, yes, ex-shelter inflation is back within the range. It's not negative. It's sub the 2% target. So it's still in an inflationary environment. It's not deflationary right now. So that's one important piece to remember. The prices are still rising. They're just rising at the pace that the Bank of Canada is comfortable with, essentially.
Yeah, so I call it disinflationary, where the rate of change is coming down, but it's still positive. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hansard.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Well, I'd like to just speak plain talk. When you're talking about homes, you mean places for people to live, dwellings. It doesn't mean they have to own them, correct? It could be apartments, it could be manufactured homes, it could be anything that provides
Correct.
shelter for people. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, because whether a person owns a home or not, somebody's still paying for that home. And one of the things that gets in the way of investors wanting to build eightplexes and fourplexes and other types of housing are those very same interest rates, because they don't all have the money to build those and then pay cash for them. So we're all affected. The thing that I find interesting is I sit here as a consumer, and it sounds in many ways like some kind of chessboard that people are playing on, but the average person, not an average in intellect, but average in their abilities to purchase and spend money on the things they need for life, are greatly affected by these interest rates. I'm always perplexed why it takes so long. Once we realize that something must be done, that interest rates must be lowered, I hear what you're saying about the soft landing, but there must be a way to accelerate that, to bring that down, because it's hurting people on their credit cards. And a lot of credit card spending has not been frivolous shopping. It's been where the money gets put, the cost of what they need gets put, because they don't have the money to pay all the bills and these higher interest rates, higher rent, or whatever. So everyday people need relief. What does it take to get the Bank of Canada, to get the federal government to hear what we need to give people a sense of relief? And the other thing, I realize it's a tremendous risk for a lender to put money out for people to purchase homes, or for investors to purchase and build places for people to live. But why in the name of heaven can those interest rates not be filtered across a longer term instead of all the interest boatloaded up front, so that they reap the profit off of that while not much gets paid down on principal, which ultimately hurts people? If we really, really want to keep an economy properly stimulated, I think we need to look at what could the money that's spent on interest that goes to lenders fund in the way of education, automobiles, clothing, and whatever else people spend money on. It seems to me that somewhere somebody needs to look at, how do we recalculate, appreciate the investment, appreciate the risk, but not give so much of that money to the lender up front, be fairer to the everyday consumer. Could you speak to any of those comments?
James, I'll start a little bit, and then maybe if you want to add to a couple points as well. The question you kind of had in there is, what does the Bank of Canada need to see, or what does the US Fed need to see to start cutting these rates more aggressively? Well, that's an easy one from an economics perspective to answer. I understand that we're talking just simply to the average consumer. Well, they have a mandate, right? Until inflation hits 2%, they're not going to do anything, and they'll keep rates wherever they need to until inflation hits 2%, because that's their mandate. So that's an unfortunate but easy answer to answer at the same time, because quite simply, myself, James Banks, we can't change the US Fed or the Bank of Canada mandates. What you're talking about from a consumer or a supply perspective, you're absolutely right. What can we do to change the structure, maybe not make it more front loaded, things like that? Well, a couple things is getting more supply to the market, whether that, and you hit on it, it's not just homes. You don't have to own the homes. It could be townhouses, condos, rezoned dwelling, things like that. We have seen significant changes in mandates on that piece, even from lending rules. I know that if you build fourplexes or higher, you can amortize them over significantly longer periods in Canada as well. That was done to incentivize these developers and builders to start focusing on more quantity, more than just individual homes, then more units essentially to the market. So the policies are starting to come in place. The unfortunate thing with these types of policies, we're talking about physical dwellings, And no matter what we do, there's going to be a significant completion lag of, okay, you create that policy and then we see the first fourplex show up. It's not going to be in an overnight situation because from a labor's perspective, going back to population and immigration, we don't have the qualified construction labor in Canada to build at the current pace to keep up. So we're in an unfortunate situation in the short term. It's going to take some time to shake this piece out. And the impact, unfortunately, is going to be affordability. Now, James, I don't know if you want to add to that as well.
I think that's great. Just in terms of you talk about the everyday person, right? I think what most people should be aware of and they're not aware of is that rate hikes disproportionately impact the poorest citizens, because they're the ones that are carrying higher debt levels. And they're the ones that are more exposed to sort of that unemployment rate coming up. So I think the problem here, that COVID shock to the system just created so many disproportionate moves in interest rates, inflation. The short answer to your question is that relief is coming and it's coming soon. Even as much as 2 weeks ago, that little quarter point interest rate cut, that flows directly through to anyone who has a variable credit line or variable mortgage. So relief is coming. I think it's been sort of a huge confluence of factors from higher inflation, higher interest rates, and now you have this sort of lag for home completion. It's just become really difficult for sort of, like you said, the everyday person.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Any other questions from members of council? So seeing none, just thank you very much, gentlemen, for attending this evening. I really appreciate the presentation. And again, very detailed, lots of information in there. And I think we had some good answers to the questions as well. So thank you for your presentation this evening. Take care.
Thank you for having us.
So with that, we will now move to item 5.1 in our agenda, and that's the adoption of the committee minutes for the June 3rd Governance and Priorities Committee. So we'll look to Councillor Meyer for the motion before we look for any errors or omissions.
I knew you were going to pick me. Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. That the June 3rd, 2024 Governance and Priorities Committee meeting minutes be accepted as presented.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Those were included in our agenda package, so we've had time to review them. I'll look to council to see if there are any errors or omissions or corrections. Mayor Choi.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just in terms of minutes and being consistent on page 37, under 4.2, where we had the Edmonton Metro Region Board update, and in our lead sheets, it sent a notice that it was Mayor Gamble, Parkland County, as the chair, and then the CEO was Karen Wheelchuck. On our minutes, it does not show that. And in terms of members that do come into our chambers, I like to make sure they're recognized for the roles that they do play.
Excellent. Thank you. I'll just look to administration. I'm assuming that's a change we can make.
Through the Deputy Mayor, we'll make that change.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other errors, omissions, or corrections? Seeing none, Councillor Meyer, you okay with that motion being changed to as amended?
Yes.
Excellent. So with that, I will call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried. Moving on to our business items. 6.1 is the CIBC Wood Gundy Investment Economic and Investment presentation that we just had. This is the business item for accepting for information. And so at this time, I'll just look to administration to see if there's anything they have to add to the presentation.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor and Council. Earlier in the evening, you received a presentation from the town's financial advisors at CIBC Wood Gundy. The presentation is in alignment and support of the town's fiscal sustainability framework, as well as the cash management and investment policy, CFS 043. The motion before council this evening is to accept the presentation for information.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. With that, before we move to a motion, I will just look for anybody from council who would like any questions of clarity or understanding from administration. So seeing none, I do have one, and it's just in regards to, you did speak a little bit on the policies and speaking that it's in alignment. What we did see in the presentation is that at current point in time, interest rates are high. However, over the next calendar year, year and a half, we are expected to see some interest rates start to fall, which would impact our investments. In relation to where our investments are today, are we currently seeing investment returns that are higher than were originally anticipated and budgeted, and what we're looking to see in the next 18 months will bring us more in line? Or are we looking at what we'll see in the next 18 months, maybe a bit of a decline from what we had in plan?
Thank you, through you, Deputy Mayor, to all of council. So we have seen gains over our budget and investment income over the past couple of years through our financial statements. And so as a result of the volatility in the market and the anticipation of the rate cuts, we have not adjusted our budget for those. Another factor in that is our cash is going down as well. We had a very large debenture that we pulled for a project, and the spend took a little bit longer than anticipated, and so we had some gains because of that. And so as we work through our corporate planning process this year, we will take into consideration what was presented this evening and also consult with CIBC Wood Gundy in projecting out the future based on our projected cash flows as well and the rates.
Excellent, thank you very much, appreciate that. I believe, as I've seen over time, we've been relatively conservative on our estimates, which has been advantageous for the town as we've moved forward with projects, and tends to put us in a positive position when it comes to that. So thank you very much for the prudency in that. Any other questions for clarity understanding? Seeing none, Councillor Hansard for the motion, please.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, I move that CIBC Wood Gundy Economic and Investment Presentation be accepted for information.
Thank you very much. Any debate or discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you very much. So with that, we have 4 more business items on the agenda, and there'll be some presentations to go with those, and I'm anticipating several questions and some discussions. So I will call a short recess, and I will ask that we return in 10 minutes at 6:37. So welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much. We are at number 6.2 on our agenda, the grant management presentation. Administration, please proceed.
Thank you. This evening, I'd like to introduce Faith Sofeso, Senior Financial Analyst with the town, who manages the grant process and is going to walk us through the process and the rigor that she goes through to ensure that we capitalize on all grants possible.
All right. Good evening, Deputy Mayor and Council. I am here presenting our internal grant management process, walking you through the steps we take to find and track grants, as well as a view of the funding landscape. So the town's grant management process can be broken into 4 stages. Alerts and leads come through various channels, and over the last year, we have received approximately 312 alerts of funding opportunities. These include federal, provincial, private sector, and community grants. Those alerts and leads are screened and researched, and if any are deemed suitable, they will proceed to application. In the last 12 months, we have submitted 8 applications and have been awarded 4 grants. 292 grants of the 312 alerts the town was not eligible for. All grants that are aligned with the town's plans and strategies were applied for. The town is set up to receive daily alerts from government funding announcements and news releases. We subscribe to PSD Citywide Municipal Grant Service, a subscription-based service which sends out weekly email alerts. We also check for updates on key websites such as Infrastructure Canada and Municipal Affairs, and we periodically receive alerts from various organizations and other sources. Grants are becoming increasingly competitive, and at the same time, the funding pot is becoming smaller. So keeping track of new opportunities is critical to ensure we're accessing all the potential funding that is available to us. There are different funding sources that the town can apply for, from federal and provincial sources, as well as community grants offered through different organizations. These include the Federal Asset Management Program, Strategic Transport Infrastructure Program, and community grants through organizations such as Co-op and Blue Cross. Allocations for Local Government Fiscal Framework and Canada Community Building Fund are distributed to municipalities based on a designated formula. So once prospective funding is identified, it is screened to determine suitability. This includes looking at whether it fits something we're already doing or planned projects and initiatives to ensure strategic alignment. We also look at the cost-benefit of applying. So for example, a $5,000 grant might cost more in terms of resources and staff time than the return. And there are time considerations, such as getting applications in as early as possible with the required documentation and necessary approvals. We're seeing funders require council approval, and in some cases, ministerial approval where there's a stacking component on the grant. And suitable grants are sent to the OCAO before an application is submitted. And typically, at a minimum, applications require proof of council approval for the project through the corporate planning process. And so here are some highlights from the federal funding announcement that we're watching for further program details and intake information on. These include $6 billion in housing infrastructure and $400 million in additional housing accelerator funding. Similarly, some provincial funding that we're keeping a close eye on includes $60 million in economic development and sustainable growth, as well as $539 million in water and wastewater infrastructure. This concludes my presentation. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the presentation. Greatly appreciated. I'll look to council. The floor is open for questions, clarity, and understanding on the presentation. Councillor Meyer, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'll get started with an easy one. Can you explain stacking to me, please?
Yes. Thank you, through you, Councilor Mayor. So stacking refers to, so let's say we're applying for provincial funding, but we can also apply for federal funding under the same umbrella. So we can stack. So we can apply for 50% from one funding source and 50% from another funding source. But typically, if you're applying for, if you have received provincial funding and you're applying for federal funding, then you do need ministerial approval for that.
Anything further? Councillor Hansard.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Well, I can't tell you how happy I was to see this in our council package. I've often wondered over the years, how do the people at the town know of all the grants? And is there a value, and this is a question for you as well, you, through this position, you seem to be someone who has the eagle eye on the money, which is very nice to know. But is there any value in members of council alerting you if we come across something through some board or committee that we're sitting in on and we overhear people talking, or when we go to a conference? Is it possible that something might not come onto your radar that we could alert you to, and is there a value for you in that?
Mr. Deputy Mayor, through to Councillor Hansard, I think, so a couple things I can add, just maybe a little bit of context as well. So I do wish to acknowledge and appreciate the finance team that's beside me here. Our grant administration has, come quite a ways, and I would say the last 3 to 5 years, become a very diligent, professionalized service within our organization, and a number of other staff contributed to that as well through information provision and so on. I think just a simple answer to that, Deputy Mayor, through to Councillor Hansard, I think if council is aware of something, doesn't hurt to let us know in one way, shape, or form. You can send that to me. If you're through the building, you can, catch our manager of finance, financial services. Let us know. You're right. We do, by the processes that were described earlier, we are aware of and see a lot of them coming through. But that's not to say we won't miss one. So.
Okay, and one just further comment, if I may, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So I'm very happy to see this and really appreciate the numbers, because I don't think most of us are aware of where these pockets of money might reside, under what category, and how much might be out there. So I personally find it wonderful that somebody's watching that for our taxpayers' benefit.
Thank you, Councillor Hansard. And we'll go to Councillor Loynes.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just for the clarification, when you had said that there was 20 that we were eligible for, but we only applied for 8, was that due to, as you had mentioned, the money spent versus money received, or was it more timeline issues? 12 seems like a lot that we didn't necessarily put applications in for.
Thank you for the question. So those 20 are everything that the town can apply for, but they might not necessarily align with what we're already doing or, our strategy. So of those 28, we did apply for because they aligned with that.
Thank you very much. Mayor Choi.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just in terms of the water and wastewater infrastructure grants, I know within our corporate plan there is quite a few projects that we plan to do as a community. Is there anything that steps out or kind of pops up right now that maybe we can accelerate a project or two if we can apply for that grant funding today?
Thank you, Mayor Choi. So we have been looking at this grant. They have not released enough detail for us to make a decision yet, but we have been in communication with our planning department, and we are keeping a close eye on that grant.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Plechko.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Faith, for the great presentation today. As I read through this, a couple of questions come to mind. We always talk about our builders and developers. Any of these grants qualify for builders and developers? And if they do, How do we let our local builders and developers know? You know, I look at this one that says 15 billion apartment construction and loans. You know, would that apply to a possible builder here?
Thank you, Councillor Palechko. So we have not had our eye on those specific grants because, no, let me correct myself. So we do watch them, but we normally don't consider them because they don't fit into what we are doing. But I think that is something that administration could potentially take away, and if there is information that we can provide to our builders, I don't know if, yeah.
Yes, thank you, Faith. That's something that if we do find something that may align to someone within the town or such as developers or other community groups, we can reach out to other program areas and see if we can filter that information back through them.
Thank you. Good.
Yeah, continue.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. As I look to page 51, I see a very large amount of potential grants for a number of infrastructure facilities and a number of things. When you say you continue to watch, is there something that you're watching for specifically? Is there something that will come across your alerts that will intrigue you to apply for, or is it just something that you need to read on a regular basis so that you know whether these apply to our community or not?
Thank you, Councillor Palechko. So of these funding announcements that the province has made, so there are some that we are keeping an eye on. So for example, the economic development and sustainable growth. We know that that is something that is in the plan for the town, as well as the water and wastewater infrastructure that was mentioned previously. We are also looking at disaster flood mitigation, affordable housing. So we are keeping an eye on them, but you know, as I mentioned earlier, we just don't have enough information to be able to. These announcements are fairly recent in April, so they haven't given us enough information for us to be able to make any sort of decisions as to what we will pursue. But as I mentioned, we get daily alerts of new announcements of when these funding applications are being open, and we attend the webinars and get as much information as we can.
I greatly appreciate that answer. I know I've been questioned off of this, what are we watching for? But I think you're very clear on what we're watching for. Now we're watching for the details of how the program is laid out to municipalities that will qualify or not qualify. So greatly appreciate the answer. Thank you.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, maybe just a couple more comments along those lines. So the other aspect I think I referenced earlier are, further, I use the term professionalization of our processes. And just like members of council, other members of staff through their professional associations and colleagues and counterparts and so on and so forth will come across some of this information or what's out there. We now have the ability, for a centralized space or individual and staffing unit to function all of that information, which bodes well for our current, but also for our future as well. And I think the other thing, I'll just maybe provide a bit of a context to Councillor Palechko related to announcements versus the details and the functionality of the grant, because often, with all good intent, announcements are made, X amount of dollars is being allocated and generates excitement and interest, and it's certainly a good investment. But then the little bit of the detail comes out, and it's maybe not quite as open-ended or what have you. And that's certainly what staff are saying. A lot of focus has to go into understanding those details as well. So.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Any other questions for clarity or discussion on the matter? So I do have a couple. One of the first ones that I'd like to ask is, you did mention a little bit in regards to the 20 eligible applications, 8 that were applied, and the 12 that were not applied. And you mentioned that they didn't align with priorities that are currently set in place. I have a question around that. So obviously when we set our priorities with the information that we know at hand. If we have this many grants, essentially 12 grants, that were available to the town that maybe don't fit our priorities, however, it's money that potentially could be on the table, and I guess how what's the vehicle or the method in which we can be better informed of these grants that are out there and a determination whether there would be a consideration of a policy or a priority shift?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, to you and all of council. So part of the wording on that is sometimes municipalities are eligible, but it might not be a program or service that we currently offer or that we provide within the town, so that is absolutely evaluated. All of those grants and those decisions, so we do have some grants that come up, and it's something that's futuristic into the corporate plan. We absolutely go through the channels through the CAO and bring that forward, and through the GMs as well, to say, does it make sense? Do we have the budget? Should we pull this forward? Do we apply? And we do, in many instances, apply for it, especially if the grant is going to pay for the full amount, or we would, in that instance, or if it wasn't going to pay for the full amount, but we felt this was something that was relevant, and that if we could get 50% of it paid for, we will definitely pursue it. That might be something that we bring forth in front of council to get a motion to fund the other 50% if we're in process application. As Faisal also mentioned, lots of the applications now are requiring council approval, so you are starting to see some of those come through here. All the grant applications also do filter through the town manager for signature approval, that sort of thing. So I think just the wording there, it's I would say there's very little that we don't apply for if we have something in the plans or it's within the realm of strategy. Maybe I'll just look at the town manager if he has anything to add.
Yeah, sure, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So there's also I think the manager of finance mentioned, if we see, grants programs being developed that have a substantial potential impact, that will also alter the corporate planning process or the ranking thereof to reprioritize, if that makes sense, some of the recommendations to council. That's one particular aspect of it. And I think the other thing that we do bear in mind, one of the challenges with the grant process and part of the rationale for creating a more of a structured review system of sorts is that we don't have we don't get too far off council's stated priorities, I guess is the basic way, because there are lots out there. Some of them, the dollar amount bluntly makes that question relevant. Some of them just sort of don't. And we will also, one of the other, we'll look for, are we already spending money in this area? And if we are, that will prioritize that particular grant, sometimes even regardless of how much it's for. So for those ones, I know council have seen those. Those are some of those smaller, like $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, like tree grants or green, programming, stuff like that. There are areas where we're already spending operating funds, and if we have the opportunity on the grant side, we will apply. If we get something, it just offsets those costs. Stop there for now.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. And I'll transition over to the non-eligible grants. So as we saw, there was a very significant number of non-eligible grants. However, we do know that many of our partner agencies are eligible for many of those grants. So a great example is the CFEP grant that the Curling Club received that is now going towards the Recreation Center, which we know as the town we would not necessarily have got. And so when we have opportunities like that, what policies do we have in place, or how do we work with our community partner agencies in where maybe there's a grant that would be available and that they would be eligible for, however, they might have a challenge meeting attainability such as matching funding. However, it's in alignment with town priorities. How do we work with our partner agencies to make sure that while we as the town may not be eligible, we encourage them to apply and we provide the support necessary for an application on that grant?
Thank you, through you, Deputy Mayor, to you and all council. Currently, we do not have a policy or procedure in regards to that, and we, as the town manager has mentioned, we have matured quite substantially in our grant process. However, I would say that's the next step in where we would want to potentially look. We would have to look internally for our capacity and then also develop that process to make sure that we can we absolutely want our community groups to be able to take advantage of those. And if we're already looking at those grants and we can identify those, but it would be, you know, building a process, building an inventory of our community groups and understanding what they do as well. So there is some complexity to that and capacity as well. But as we continue to mature and get better, I think that we can implement that.
Excellent, thank you very much. And the last, I guess, is just more of a general comment. For those similar grants, the ones that the town's not eligible, I know our community social development and our economic development departments both do great jobs with communicating out to their partner agencies or their integrated agencies and the ones who they're prioritized through. And so I hope that when we are identifying these grants, if we are identifying that the town might not be eligible, that at minimum we are ensuring that they're somehow included in the communications from those departments out to those agencies. So while we may not have a process in place today on how we can help them with applications and support, at least we have a communication process. So maybe if they weren't aware of them, through the tools that we've got in place to be made aware of the grants, that we're making sure all of our community agencies and groups are aware of those grants. The other one on that would be, you know, we do have our own internal policies on things like our infill policy, and we know that density and housing is an issue. Again, we just had a presentation from CIBC Wood Gundy today. We just had a presentation from our MP today, and what we continually heard was housing, housing supply, housing stock, housing affordability. And so with our infill policy, and then with grants that are available, such as the apartment loan program that Councillor Podlachko referenced here, you know, again, I'm hoping that there are ways that we make sure that we're working with our development community, or we're working with our partners so that we can ease the access, I guess I would say, and knowing that, you know, if we have certain properties that qualify for infill, we're aware of this program, we're aware of kind of the parameters around it, that we make sure that that partner is well aware, and we make sure that partner is aware of the support the town could be in an application for that. With that, I'm just looking to see if there are any other questions for clarity and understanding on the presentation. Perfect. Seeing none, I will go to Councillor Loynes for the motion, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I move that the grant management presentation be accepted for information.
Thank you for the motion. Any debate or discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much for your presentation. 6.3, we have the land management report. Administration, go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, Your Worship, and members of Council. For your information this evening, we are providing you with the annual land management report for 2023. This annual report is a requirement of our land management policy, which includes our oversight and management and consideration of surplus and disposal of town-owned property and how it's best used to optimize and maximize town-owned land through our decision-making and through our guidance with good management of our properties and our land. The policy itself requires that administration present to council on an annual basis a summary of our current inventory of town-owned property, as well as any properties that may be declared surplus for disposal. We also highlight and report to council any projected land requirements looking into the future, and summarize any land transactions that have occurred to ensure council is succinctly aware of land transactions and decisions that have occurred for the past year. So again, this report is seeking your acceptance for information based on our land summary for 2023. And I'll just highlight for you, the report is summarized beginning on page 54 of the council agenda package. And the beginning of it is an overview of our current land holdings. So within 2023, there was really just a minor change, I would say, in transactions and change in our inventory of properties. So the town currently has within its ownership 389 lots or properties, and that includes 385.9 acres of land, and that is a slight increase over 2022. So we added 4 lots to our inventory and a total of 0.2 hectares in 2023. These were primarily transactions that occurred due to residential development, the transfer of municipal reserve and reserves from land developers as requirement for development projects to proceed. So within the surplus category of what we are reporting to council, there was one property that we currently have listed for surplus. Council made the decision to declare it surplus at the end of 2023, and it's currently listed for sale, for market. It's a piece of property on 52nd Avenue. Additionally, the town is looking at, and ironically enough, there's quite a bit of commentary this evening, and it was not intended, but around the need for housing development and housing stock and inventory. And so looking at projects into the future, the town has indicated to council through an application with the Housing Accelerator Fund in the fall of 2023, an effort to take a more thoughtful approach to any feasibility for underutilized town-owned land and how that may be utilized for housing development. So that is something that we may look to bring back to council, where there might be an opportunity for surplus property in the future. And so just wanted to highlight that as that was presented to council with that Housing Accelerator Fund approval that council provided in the fall of 2023. In terms of further projected land requirements, we will continue to, as property develops and land development occurs within the community, continue to have a level of transactions and inventory that comes into the town's ownership through municipal reserves, public utility lots, and things of that nature as subdivision and development takes place within the community, and that's transacted on an annual basis and summarized for you in this report. Additionally, I'd also like to highlight that as we look into the future, we are preparing for a large transfer of land. So this year we had 0.2 hectares in 2023 that came into the town's inventory. We have an agreement with Parkland School Division for the lands around Old Town South and part of the redevelopment of Old Town South, where once Parkland School Division and the province complete the demolishment of Stony Plain Central School, that property and those lands will come into town ownership, and that will bring about 10 hectares of land into the town's inventory. So that'll be a significant adjustment and a significant increase in our inventory. And again, looking at future redevelopment, future opportunities for housing and redevelopment, those will become more prominent conversation points as we look into the future in terms of how we manage our inventory of land for the town, and some decisions that we'll make in terms of how we best utilize those properties for the betterment of the community. So with that, I just wanted to provide that overview. We do have a public portal on our town's website where we do have the ability for the public to see the layer of town-owned property through our mapping software on the website. So it's a very transparent place for members of the public to understand what inventory we have for land and where it's located and such. So that's available for members of the public to access, and for us to be able to ensure that we have clarity of what is in the town's inventory and what we currently have intended for designation and use of those sites as well. So with that, Deputy Mayor, I'll just close and be happy to answer any questions of council with regards to that.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the presentation. Open the floor for questions of clarity and understanding on the presentation. Mayor Choi.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I appreciate the report, and I think this is really good for us as in terms of the council and the community to see that yearly update of what we're acquiring, what we're trying to liquidate and move out. I think during the presentation there was mention about a lot that we're trying to sell. Is there an update on that, and if there's any other lots that may be coming available that is deemed excess so that we can get them back to the community?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, through your worship and all the members of council. So currently we have one property that is for sale at this point in time. It was just put on the market a couple of months ago. I don't have any further update other than it's currently available for sale and for market. We do an ongoing assessment, and this report certainly helps to trigger us to review and look at our land inventory, look at identifying opportunities for surplus and disposal. And at this point in time, we don't have anything further that we want to recommend to council. However, I will reiterate, as we have with every annual report that we bring to council on our land, we do look for opportunities on an ongoing basis to address land opportunities and adjustments in our inventory. And we certainly don't wait for the annual report to be brought before you to make those decisions. We'll bring those for council's consideration so that we're ensuring a timely decision where it's required. So nothing to speak to specifically this evening, but certainly that's something that we do address on an ongoing basis, and where an opportunity arises that is suitable and fits within the needs of the community, we would bring that forward. I would just add to that typically our first layer of priority, which is within the policy, the land management policy itself, is ensuring that we have an understanding of whether or not the property has municipal use. So if the property is deemed to have a municipal use, we typically would retain it. Where it does not have an opportunity for municipal use, that is where we would start the process of considering whether it should be recommended for surplus. So I'll just leave it at that, and hopefully that answers your question, Your Worship, and anything further.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Seeing none, I just did have one question. I know in previous conversations around this, there were what I would call sliver lots or small parcels, small pieces of land that had been identified. I don't see those necessarily reflected in the document. What would be the process around those, around some of those small pieces that maybe aren't even large enough to be demised and to be sold individually? How do we manage those?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So with regards to those, first and foremost, again, similar to what I had indicated, we would have to understand if there is an intended municipal use, even if they're a small parcel. They may be part of a public utility or a right-of-way, a road right-of-way. Those are often, we often see those as slivers of land that we retain. So there may be an intended use to retain those for those purposes that may not be visible on the surface, but perhaps underneath the surface there is a need for those to be retained. If they're not, we do have an inventory of those, and we have opportunities where it's identified to transact those, depending on what the designation of the land is. It can determine what the process is to dispose of that. Utility lots and road right-of-ways have a different process than a piece of land that does not have a constraint or a limitation for those types of uses. So if it has no designation on it or no constraint, I would say it makes the process different or less cumbersome. So those are also some of the things we take into consideration when we're looking at those. But we can typically transact, or we have been transacting, and I'll just look to the General Manager of Planning Infrastructure if he wants to add anything further, but we would typically transact maybe a couple of those per year where it's deemed appropriate and where it's a good fit in terms of timing and opportunity to do so. So we've certainly got a radar on those as well.
Thank you, General Manager. Through you, Deputy Mayor, and to the rest of the council, it's correct. We do get a couple of inquiries with respect to right-of-ways and additional land space from various types of forms, and they're evaluated on a case-by-case basis, depending on the nature. As the town grows and our understanding and our inventory of our own land becomes more clear with the residents that have lived here or there in different places around town, or even businesses or whatnot, that we do get inquiries on why land is a certain way, maybe open for a long time, what's the use, and we'll generally walk through those inquiries on a case by case. They're not substantial, but like in terms of volume, but we do get them from time to time.
Excellent, thank you very much. And just further on to that question, I know many of these lots, or some of these lots, run adjacent to private lots, lots that are owned, and over time, with no seeming usage to lots, sometimes we've seen things like sheds be placed on these lots, or fences end up on the town property, or things like that. How do we go about addressing those? How do we make sure that we're managing those? So especially if those lots do have use, such as being a public utility lot for drainage or those type of things, how are we making sure that there aren't items of impact being used on those lots?
So I'll just start, Deputy Mayor, and then perhaps if our General Manager of Planning and Infrastructure wants to supplement. We do have a number of occurrences where we monitor any encroachments that are occurring on town property, and we typically, try to address those directly with, if it's a neighboring property owner, and we look at ways to identify, how that can be addressed, either through agreements, which we've had in place is one example that I'm aware of, but I'm also aware of an example of where we have looked at disposing of the property, again, where there's no intended need to retain the property for municipal use, either now or into the future. So there are opportunities like that where you have neighboring property owners. Sometimes there needs to be consideration of how there needs to be, what that framework of disposal would look like for the neighboring property owners, if there's more than one, and what the impact of that would look like. So is there other comments you wanted to add?
Thank you, General Manager. Through the Deputy Mayor to the rest of Council, as the General Manager of Strategic Services just noted, encroachments and notifications by anyone that that are notified to a town that may be utilizing a right-of-way, albeit whether it's a utility right-of-way, a PUL. Again, those are dealt with on case by case, but a couple of examples, just broadly speaking, a utility right-of-way, it may be a vacant lot behind an industrial area for 30 or 40 years. The business has been there a long time. Perhaps they never put up a fence, and just over time, some of their business items have just crept into that location. We receive a complaint either from the utility right-of-way, one of the utilities that occupies the right-of-way for work. They notice it. We go have a conversation with them through our development officers, or we contact enforcement as well. That's one example for utility right-of-ways. It can also happen on old road right-of-ways that maybe didn't get fully utilized during the land use process. Over time, as I mentioned, the town having grown through different maturation phases, we do find from time to time that not all encroachments are deliberate. Sometimes they've just occurred. So we do try and work with the circumstance to which it's in front of us and the businesses or landowners. Sometimes they are deliberate and they need their own action. Sometimes people are just seeing if they can utilize the space until they're told they can't, and those are dealt with appropriately when they become notified to us.
Excellent, thank you very much. We'll just look to see if there are any other questions for clarity and understanding. Seeing none, Councillor Palechko for the motion, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, that the land management report be accepted for information.
Thank you for that. Any debate or discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 6.4 on our agenda, the Forest Green Plaza update. Administration, please go ahead with your presentation.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor and Council. Tonight, Administration is bringing forward a report on the Forest Green Plaza. This report was requested during the corporate plan process this past November. The town's manager of infrastructure operations, Paul Simons, is here tonight to present the report, and he and myself are available for questions post the presentation.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor, Council. I'll be presenting an update on Forest Green Plaza. This presentation will review the facility history, current state strategies, and options for consideration and next steps. Forest Green Plaza was purchased by the town in 2 phases, in 2002 and 2013, for a total purchase price of the building just over $2.1 million. The remaining debenture for Forest Green Plaza is just over $1 million currently. The building received a real property appraisal in 2021 and was valued at the time just above $2.2 million. Current state, there are 2 private businesses leasing 4 of the west bays of this property. Town of Stony Plain office, meeting, and storage spaces occupy 3 bays, and currently 7 bays of the old library space in Forest Green Plaza are currently vacant. A facilities condition assessment was engaged, Roth IMS was engaged in 2023 to give a review of the Stony Plain facilities. This facility was assessed, and from that assessment was given an overall acceptable condition by their rating scale of good, acceptable, fair, and poor. This assessment inspected all our building components and provided a life cycle plan. Within the Forest Green Life Cycle Charter that has been submitted in the corporate plan, there's more than $1 million in components replacements scheduled within the next 10 years. These components include replacement roof, heating and ventilation, rooftop units, parking lot, exterior stucco, and windows for major items. Just a current state of our accommodations. Town hall space accommodations for staff are being extended into support spaces currently and are being considered for options in the 2025 to 27 corporate plan. The cost for leasing space of this size would be $45,000 to $105,000 per year, and then operating costs would be added to that. New initiative for meeting space for future office spaces needs have been added to the 25 to 27 corporate plan for consideration. Forest Green Plaza options for consideration. 1, retain Forest Green Plaza, utilize the remaining vacant building space for future town space requirements, including employee accommodation, meeting space, and storage space. Options would be brought forward in future corporate plans. To continue searching for leasing partners to make use of unoccupied space. Or 3, we could look at sell Forest Green Plaza and enter into formal lease agreements for current and future town uses. Administration recommends to keep Forest Green Plaza as a town facility for accommodation of town staff growth. Rationale is that town hall staff accommodation is currently utilizing support spaces for staff workstations, and all recommendations for staff accommodation fit up at Forest Green Plaza will be brought forward in future corporate plans. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your presentation. And council, the floor is open for any questions of clarity or understanding on the presentation. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I think I'm missing a bay somewhere, because you said the current state, there's 4 bays that are leased. Town of Stony Plain occupies 3, and that left 7 vacant.
Yes.
That only adds up to 14. And it says it's a 15-bay building.
Through you, Deputy Mayor. Let me take that back and take a look at it. I have a feeling that I might have be missing 1 bay.
Thank you.
Councillor Plechko.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you for the presentation, and a couple questions. First question would be regarding page 65 of our package. When you refer to equivalent space, current market would be $12 to $28 a square foot for rent, plus operating costs. I assume that somewhere along the way, we would have an escalating cost for that. What would be the cost savings to the town by keeping the building over the next number of years, taking into consideration the upkeep and maintenance on the building as well?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, that is something that we can work out and bring back to council.
Okay, I think that would be helpful for a lot of us when we look at this back in the day, and your appraised value of 2.2 million was in 2021 or 2023? Because I think you made reference to 2023, and on page 62, you make reference to 2021.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the appraised value was a 2021 value.
Okay, thanks. I'll let somebody else, and then I'll have more questions.
Thank you. Mayor Choi?
Okay. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And I think one of the calculations that are incorrect is why we have 15 bays and only 7 that are vacant to be rented is because that a portion of one bay which was occupied by the public library house our archives. So I think one of the reasons that that is not being rented is because we not let another entity control our archives, so that one bay is. So I think there should be 4 bays that are currently leased out, 3 bays that are currently occupied by the town of Stony Plain, 1 bay that houses our archive, and 7 bays that are vacant for rent. Okay, and the question in terms of the commentary and the presentation by administration that the recommendation is to maintain it for future town youth in terms of employees. And I think there's a little commentary about staff that's currently using it right now for meeting areas and stuff. So my question is to staff is what do they foresee going in there? Would it be like the youth center expansion? Would it be planning infrastructure? Will it be community and protective services? What's kind of the idea behind keeping it and maybe using it for future town use?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, through to Mayor Choi. So, you know, part of the recommendation for the future state is to, you know, maintain town ownership and to split the utilization between future town staffing requirements or needs and potential community service needs, community development needs. So, if you're asking the question about what staff, what area, who would go over there in this potential new office setting. I don't know, I would say, or we could say it would be exactly this group or exactly that group. You know, I can say what, you know, typically your corporate service functions tend to operate out of the main city hall or the town office and so on and so forth. As you see organizations that, like I would say in the Alberta context in our setting, as they tend to grow or they outgrow one particular building, I've seen planning and infrastructure departments move off-site to a different building, and I've also seen community protective services sort of customer-focused or community service-focused functions moving as well. But Your Worship and the rest of the council, I would say there's been no decisions made on that at this point.
Thank you. Anything further?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. On page 66, the administration provided 3 options for consideration. As one is to maintain it for town use, one is to find a leasing partner, and the other was to sell it. Could not be a combination of 1 and 2 be utilized here, where the town retains maybe a bay or 2 for the current use of I think our seasonal staff having meetings, etc., and then leasing the other 2 or 3 bays until a time that we do need those areas.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, to Mayor Choi. That is, the considerations for options were 3 potential options. Interplay between all 3 is possible. And the third sell, I believe this building is already a condo agreement, so we could actually sell each of those individual single bays.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hanser.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I have a couple or 3 questions. One, if the building is sitting in town ownership, we do not pay tax on that. Is that correct? I'm not sure who to ask that of. Our financial manager.
Thank you, through Deputy Mayor, to Councillor Hansard and all of council. If it is being used for municipal purposes, it is exempt from tax. If it is being leased as the lease section, there's taxes paid on those.
Okay, and when the property is sitting vacant, that it is not really being used, but it still belongs to us, we pay no tax on that.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, that would be correct.
Okay, so, Mr. Deputy Mayor, again, I guess through to our financial manager, the concern that I have is if we're not collecting tax, then that's a loss of income, which would help to offset taxes for our taxpayers. To allow it to just sit vacant doesn't make sense. Although later, when we get into the annual report, we see that we're at capacity in this building. It seems that we should be putting something in that building so that maybe we're not so stressed for space here, or the upgrades for the youth center could happen. I realize we wouldn't be getting taxed, but we'd be making use of the building. One of the concerns that I had, though, was on page 65, when we're talking about the lease rate of $12 to $28 per square foot for base rent. $12 a square foot is generally $8, $10, $12 is a warehouse type of rent on property. The commercial aspect, in that it's not a warehouse, seems to me like that should be higher. And I realize we're just trying to get an idea about what kind of money is sitting there potentially, what does the town own in an asset that has the capability of earning taxes. I also know that when we sell the property, any portion of the property, getting it back is going to cost us way more money than it did when we purchased it. So I also question a little bit the appraisal. 3 years ago, an appraisal is not the same value as 2024, especially with the type of market that we're having in real estate right now. So for council to make wise decisions around this, it might be worth having perhaps a more recent appraisal for us to be able to know what the real today's value is. So, Mr. Deputy Mayor, one of the concerns that I have is that without forming an absolute opinion, I'm leaning in the direction that we should not sell, but that we should make an effort to get this property leased out, and not necessarily long-term leases. So how does council come to a conclusion, Mr. Deputy Mayor, on what we inform administration that we want to do if, one, we don't really know what the current appraised value is, two, perhaps one of the rents here anyway is more along the lines of a warehouse, not a commercial building with finished space and offices, et cetera, more like a commercial or office setting. I feel like maybe the information is a little bit skewed for us. We can't really make accurate decisions around what we might want to see the town do. And I realize for this report, we're just accepting for information. We're not really getting to direct anybody about this. Am I correct in that?
So thank you, Councillor Hansard. One of the things that council could do with this information item is, yes, you're correct, being a governance priority meeting, we cannot make any other decisions of council. However, we can refer this item to a regular council meeting, which we would then be able to have a decision item presented.
Okay, and then I guess finally, and I mentioned it before, if we're really tight on space in this building, at capacity, I think was the term that's used later, and the next agenda item. It doesn't make sense to me that this building is sitting here vacant for so many months when we could begin to make strides to do something with that space to make meaningful use of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hansard. Were there any other questions in there that you were looking for answers for?
Well, I guess in putting out my thoughts, there are a number of questions in there, Mr. Deputy Mayor, but my purpose tonight is not to put anybody on the spot. It's simply to say that I had some concerns that were raised in some of the numbers that were used tonight, and I don't feel, I mean, I'm certainly willing to accept it for information, but I feel like we need more work. So how long would it take for us to get that work back? Would we be likely to see this information come back in a more up-to-date manner so that this council could make a decision on what to do next?
Thank you, Councillor Hansard. And I think what I'll do is I will defer that until we have a motion on the floor. And so we'll continue on with any questions of clarity or understanding on the report that's before us. And then once we have a motion on the floor, we can go through the debate and discussion as to whether that motion is to be accepted or whether we are looking for more information and a potential bringing back to another RCM. Any other questions of clarity and understanding? Councillor Plechko.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Page 64 of our package, current state facility conditions. Again, as I read through this, and I won't go far from not agreeing with Councillor Hansard, I think there's a lot of information in here that we require to give us a much better ability to assess. But I do think I remember you saying that there was about $1 million of upgrade over the next 10 years. Having said that, and dealing with many condo associations, that could be over 10 years, maybe closer to 15 or 20 as well, correct? Because we don't truly know when the roof's going to fail or if it's going to be a partial fail. So that's just an estimate which would get built into the town budgeting process. Is that what would be happening with this if it was to stay within the organization?
Through your Deputy Mayor to Councillor Plechko, yes. The life cycle plans are built out and over the 10-year window, and assessments are done throughout as those items come back into the capital planning window where those dollars are reassessed.
Continue.
If I could. So just a little tiny bit further, you spoke about leases within the building. Some of that leasing will have a triple net that it's attached to it, which will help to offset the cost of this. Also, what will happen, correct me if I'm wrong, but through that lease process, it helps, Councillor Hansard made reference to a cost associated to our taxpayer. But the cost associated to that building by using it by the town would be deferred by somewhat of the people that are using that building, correct?
Through your Deputy Mayor to Councillor Plechko, the leasing portions of that building will assist with sort of our portions until we need that space and can grow into that space in that building.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Choi.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just again, back onto page 64, which Councillor Plechko referenced. In terms of the deferred maintenance that's required over the next 10 years, I know there was a conversation amongst council earlier this year in terms of the exterior of the building, regards to the little yard there has been coming to disrepair. So I think there was a conversation on that. Can administration provide, is that part of the 10-year capital plan to redo that, or has there been another, I guess, budgeted dollars that were taking care of it this year?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, to your worship, I do recall the conversation with council on the I think it's the little garden that's out front. I don't believe that's been actioned inside of this report. It is. I don't recall if it's been planned for being removed yet or not. That's something I would have to take back and bring back to council.
Thank you. If it hasn't been planned or removed, can we get an update to council when it'll be kind of maintained?
Through Deputy Mayor, to your worship, I'll provide a email on that.
And Deputy Mayor, just my final comments there again. This is a good conversation starter, and definitely there's lots to digest. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why I was here and it was brought forward through the corporate plan was to look at some of the buildings that we do have and the positives and negatives of owning it or maybe leasing it back, et cetera. I think this gives us the starting point to maybe have a more in-depth conversation during strategic planning where we get more of the information that we're required to have that more thorough conversation with all members of council to decide, what are we doing with this? It's very similar to what we did with the Old Town Community Center. It was what we also did with expansion of the second floor of the Old Town office, and then also now with the new Public Works Administration building. That's all part of the administrative kind of concept about, hey, this is what we need in terms of staff. The council takes all that in and deliberates that, and I think this is a good opportunity for us to add it to one of our strategic plans.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Your Worship. I'll just look to see if there are any other questions of clarity or understanding. Seeing none, I do have a few. Some of what I had has been answered, but I think there's a couple more that I would like to expand on. First and foremost, I guess, would just be in respect to the sorry, I'm just trying to find the page here again. In respect to page 63, where we show the vacant bays, it shows we have the 7 vacant bays. Again, we have that $12 to $28 a square foot. And so currently, my understanding then would be is that on the table, unleased would be approximately $105,000 to $250,000 a year in value.
To Councillor Laurie, to Deputy Mayor, you're looking about half the space available. So yeah, I believe we will take the math back and do it right for our whatever the council does want, but we will make sure that the math does work out.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, and just for simplicity, I used the numbers on page 65 showing the future office space rent, 3 bays, 3,750 square feet, so 1,250 square feet a bay times 7 bays times the $12 to $28 a square foot. That's how I came up with those figures. And so again, we heard the $1 million in improvements that are required over the next 10 years in the capital plan, thereabouts, potentially with some inflation on top. So in my understanding of that, then, if we were to look at leasing these, we would potentially earn the revenue required, because right now we have the operating expenses of the building. That's it. That's all we do have. 4 units leased. I'm assuming there's at least a significant coverage of operating expenses with those units. So generally right now, if we have approximately $100,000 to $250,000 sitting on the table of unleased space, within the next 4 to 10 years, we could acquire a reasonable amount of revenue that could go towards the capital expenses of the continued ownership of that building, correct?
Through to Deputy Mayor, yes.
Excellent, thank you very much. So then further on to that, when we speak about the requirement for additional office space for the town, this is not a new thing. We've been aware of this for several years, and part of that awareness was the plan of the acquisition of lands around the town office. And we do have lands around the town office acquired that were intended in use to help work towards that issue. What I'm hearing here is potentially a little bit of a deviation then away from those plans into utilizing forest green because we already have building ownership versus building new. So maybe a 2-part question here. I'm looking then of a little bit of an explanation and an expansion then around the ownership of the lands around town office and the purpose of those. Should we be moving forward with the utilization of forest green for town purposes for administration? And then number 2 on that would be, what does $1 million get us for a new building versus putting $1 million into a relatively old building just to essentially maintain it as a relatively old building?
Excuse me. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I think I can provide some context and excuse me, commentary related to the first portion of the question. So, in relation to been other potential development lands or property owned by the town. So first thing there, I think council's generally where I won't go, super detailed here, but there are different lots owned across the street from the town office and one, call it behind the town office or across the alley. And those have historically been contemplated for some form of town square or potential town utilization. Of that town utilization, one consideration would be potential office space or staffing space or team space, I guess. So first comment I'll make there is, that's the historical understanding and strategy, frankly. So that being said, we also own this building that we're talking about this evening. And what the recommendation, which is essentially to maintain town ownership for what I would say midterm perspective, so give or take 10 years if you think about it that way, and to utilize that both for certain staffing uses and potential community uses, or as I think there's a question earlier, and a commentary about, or a combination thereof, lease space, revenue generation. One of the challenges that we do have, or we do see, is what we're proposing. Part of the proposal, part of the strategy, I guess, is what I'd say, is to create a certain amount of certainty related to this building and some of our future potential homes for staff. So if you're, frame it in the sense of, what are we going to be doing over the next 10 years? I like to believe that we would be moving forward with some of the old town square stuff around the town office. But I'm less certain of that, other than knowing that Forest Green, as we currently have it, we already own it. It's in decent shape. It's not in the best shape. I'm not going to reiterate the entire report in front of you, but part of the recommendation is that this would create some certainty. We would understand what our one path of our future is, and we'd be able to plan accordingly and adjust accordingly. I also believe that to maintain it or to invest further in it, whether that's asset maintenance or potential lease revenues, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it would be a good thing, whether 3 years from now or 10 years from now or 12 years from now. So I'll stop there, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to the rest of council. That's some of the perspective that we were contemplating in bringing forward the notion of not ruling out leasing, but ruling in town ownership for a period of what I would estimate to be about 10 years at this point in time.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. And so then the general question, we did hear Mayor Choi refer to conversations potentially in strategic planning surrounding this item. However, our strategic planning wouldn't occur until January. We do know that through process, even if it's identified in strategic planning, there would be a high likelihood that it would still take quite some time before any action or activity was potentially undertaken with that, as strategic planning has to make its way in through corporate planning and so on and so forth. With that mention of the options of consideration and the ability to move forward what seems like relatively quickly with a potential combination of, say, item 1 and item 2, how would council then go about moving this from the RCM, or from a GNP meeting to an RCM to potentially direct some of that to occur while council contemplates the future use of the facility through strategic planning?
Mr. Deputy Mayor, through to the rest of council, I think it was alluded to earlier. It would just be, referring this particular item to a future council meeting for debate and direction. I believe that would be a fairly straightforward motion. That would bring it into the chambers in a form that it would be potentially actionable by council. Just as a matter of process, the report in front of you isn't except for information. It does allude to the intent of administration, though. And that intent would be to move forward into corporate planning, preparing item for council discussion that would seek to retrofit portions of I believe about a 3-bay portion, if I'm correct, for future staff use. That would leave the other bays remaining open for, you know, what, like potential community use or potential lease use. So I'll stop there, Mr. Deputy Mayor. That's just a item of process. I guess what I'm saying, one more time, maybe just to be clear, so that, you know, should council see fit to just simply accept this for information, the course of action administration would take would be to continue to work on the potential for adding a staffing space into Forest Green. Council would still have the opportunity to debate, discuss, dialogue on that during the corporate plan process. I'll stop there, Mr. Deputy Mayor, just to see if that's answered the question or...
Thank you. And then for clarity on that, as you had mentioned, that would not occupy the entire current vacant space. During that discussion point at corporate plan, would there be opportunity for discussion of the remaining vacant space?
I mean, short answer would be yes, in that there's always time for discussion or debate on that. But, so yeah, short answer would be yes.
Thank you. Mayor Choi, you had your hand up.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just maybe a question for some clarity from administration. So I think this information was brought forward to council as for information only because it was a motion during the corporate plan. If the town council is considering to maintain the current use, maybe going with recommendations 1 and 2, currently the town is already doing that. So I don't think nothing needs to come back to council to approve that because that's already been approved. Because as you can see, that other bays have been leased. We're still using that. So the property and the use is the same. I think the conversation is amongst council, as you kind of alluded earlier, is like, do we maintain it? Do we keep it? What do we do with the lands here? It's more of a larger conversation where it takes more time to build out. I think if council is okay with the continued usage of using it for our current needs as well, and also leasing whatever bays that we don't need, I don't think it needs to come back to council as a direct motion to direct staff to do that.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would tend to agree, and I think the opportunity to discuss that during corporate plan, as we've heard from administration, there is a potential corporate plan item coming forward related to the building. I think that I would concur that likely would give us an opportunity at that point in time to discuss it. So with that, I will look for any other questions of clarity or understanding for the presentation. Councillor Hansard, go ahead.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, I listened to the conversation around the little garden that was created out front. How did we leave that? I find it not acceptable to be at town property and that area look as bad as it does. And several of the residents in the area agree with me.
Thank you. I believe we were getting an email update on that from the general manager. Seeing no other questions for clarity or understanding, I will go to Mayor Choi for the motion, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Make motion that Town Council accepts the Forest Green Plaza update for information.
Thank you very much. Any debate or discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I will just make a general comment on the motion. Again, I appreciate this coming back to council from administration. I think this is definitely one of those properties that council's had their eye on as to how its future use could impact the town, both internally and externally. I think obviously there's always value in assets, but we want to make sure that the assets that we do have are being used in the most prudent manner to make sure that they're not a detriment to our town, to a tax base, and all those. So I'm looking forward myself to seeing what will come forward in corporate plan and understanding how the future use of Forest Green Plaza may unfold. With that, I will call the question. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Item 6.5, our last business item this meeting is the 2023 annual report. Administration, please go ahead.
Good evening. Once again, Deputy Mayor and Council, we're pleased to inform Council the 2023 annual report is released or will be released subsequent to this meeting and has been submitted to the Government Finance Officers Association, or GFOA, for consideration in the Canadian Award for Financial Reporting, known as CANFR. This submission marks the 13th application for the town. The town was recently recognized at the GFOA conference from the GFOA International Delegate as one of the recipients for the 2022 annual report submission just a couple weeks ago. Council's commitment to transparency through a detailed annual report has proved successful through the achievement of this award for 12 years straight. The report presents highlights for the year, including both financial and non-financial data, and is a collaboration between communications and financial services. The document provides additional detail beyond the audited financial statements with a 5-year statistical analytical section, as well as information on programs and achievements throughout the year. The annual report will be live on our website for viewing following this meeting, and award recipients for this intake cycle will be announced in spring 2025.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the report, and I will open the floor for any questions of clarity and understandings on the 2023 annual report. Seeing none, Councillor Meyer for the motion, please.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. What are we on? We're on 6.5? That the 2023 annual report be accepted for information.
Thank you very much, Councillor Meyer. I will look for any debate, discussion, comments on the motion. Mayor Choi.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and just again, just want to thank the staff for a great job of providing the report and making sure that it is easy to read and understand for a member of our residents. As mentioned, this will be the 13th application to the financial reporting, and we've won it the past 12 years since the town started to do this annual report. So congratulations to our staff and definitely the integrity of making sure that we're transparent to our residents. I just wanted to highlight one thing as well on page 89. I think a lot of business owners kind of forget that even though Stony Plain is just roughly around 19,000 people, we do have a service area of 441,000 people within a half-an-hour drive. So 30 kilometers, which is probably about a 20-minute drive for most of us.
Thank you very much, Mayor Choi. Any other debate discussion? Councillor Hansard.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Well, I think I've missed reading a lot of our town reports when I wasn't on council there for 4 years, because when we get them now, I get really quite excited. I want to commend our mayor and CAO for the wonderful messages at the beginning, not too long, not too short, but very, very direct, and hitting a message, each of you, in a way that I think makes people proud to be part of the town of Stony Plain. The photography is great. Each and every item on each and every page is presented in a concise way that allows people to grab what it is that administration is trying to tell us of. I feel like it's a state of the region in a written form, and it's a wonderful thing to see. So I encourage all of those who are tuned in or who will watch this council meeting on YouTube later to please spend a little time reading this report, because there's a lot of really good information in there, and it will give you a broader perspective of what our town is about and what makes it tick. And it's a lot to do with our great staff, and I'd like to think that council plays a part of that. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hansard. Any other? Seeing none, I'll echo those sentiments as well. I love the direct tie into our strategic plan that we see in our annual report. It's a great opportunity for residents to see a very clear, transparent, and simple document that's very easy to understand, in which they can tie the two. They can look back at our strategic plan, understand our priorities, and then they can look at our annual report and basically give us a bit of a report card and how we've done on that and what we've been able to achieve. So I love the way that that's highlighted. And then again, even with the financial information, the way that it's all laid out, the simplicity and the ease of understanding for residents and lay people to go through, again, it creates a great sense of transparency and accountability. And so I wish all the best of luck on the award. I'm confident that we will receive it again, and I look forward to being up front again next spring with that plaque with you and your team. So thank you very much for that. And with that, no other debate or discussion on the motion. I will call the question. All those in favor? Excellent. Thank you very much. And then on to our last agenda of the evening. It is council discussion. We'll start with Mayor Choi tonight.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just the kind of maybe a question for our staff. You know, a little while ago, I was super excited to see the signs go up on 16A, and the Alberta Transportation was redoing that road and providing an overlay. However, it has been a couple weeks now, and I don't see any more vehicles out there, but there is probably about a 20-foot gap on the north side of the highway, and maybe a kilometer that's not done on the south side of 16A. Can administration provide any inputs of why we kind of have those missing areas that are not paved?
Through Deputy Mayor, to your worship, we did reach out to Alberta Transportation on that. There was a utility crossing agreement that was needed by the contractor, so work has currently stalled. They are anticipating having that work done. The sections that you mentioned by July 15th. We'll be keeping in contact with them if that changes.
Okay, thank you. And my next comment is through the last couple of events that we've had in the community, like summer sessions and Midsummer Thursday, and then even most recently the downtown car show, a lot of residents have, even visitors have come to me and say what a great job our staff are doing in terms of maintaining our flower beds, especially downtown with the hanging baskets and everything else. I have to say it's fantastic. I think they've said this is probably the best they've seen in many years, so thank you and kudos to our staff. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Choi. Councillor Loynes.
Nothing for me this evening.
Excellent. Councillor Plechko.
Nothing, thank you.
Councillor Meyer.
Yes, just in the absence of our Councillor Anderson, I will make a statement about gratitude. I very much appreciated joining the Filipino community at their third annual. Is it the Filipino Heritage Society? Their event this past weekend. It was much appreciated to get the invite. They are, what's the word? A dynamic addition to the culture and fabric of this community.
Thank you very much, Councillor Meyer. Councillor Hansard.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I was going to mention the Filipino third celebration held out at Heritage Park. What a loud event, but boy, do they have a lot to shout about. They're very, very proud people to be in our tri-region, and so if you couldn't be there and not feel the respect and love that they have for this community and for the way they're treated by staff and council and members of the community. So it was a wonderful thing to behold, and I'll admit, I've never had the opportunity to eat a roasted pig before with the head, the feet, the tails, and the crispy are still on. So that was an experience, but it was delicious food. I also wanted to encourage everyone, be sure to take in summer sessions this Wednesday. I think our first summer sessions, we had rain, a lot of people left. We had about 200 or so, maybe 250. Third summer session, we had 351. Sorry, that was the second, we had 351. Last week, we had 500. And I think our highest attendance ever was like 750 last year. So I think we're on track to break those records. It would be wonderful if everybody came out and enjoyed the music. Free concert, how can you beat that? Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Councillor Hansard. I'll echo that. Again, we're entering into event season, even though in Stony Plain we're proud to have some pretty wonderful events year-round, but we know the summer season definitely gets a little bit busier around here for that. And so just strongly encourage our residents to get out and attend our events and invite your friends, especially your friends that don't reside in Stony Plain, and have them come see what's so incredible about our community. And hey, you know what? There's lots of houses for sale here. So come build a new home here, come move into our community, and enjoy this year-round. Again, huge gratitude out to not only our town staff, but a lot of the crews that are in our community doing work. We've got a lot of work going on in our community, from the TELUS fiber expansion to the road crews out doing work to our new public works building under construction and the soon-to-be rec center construction going on. And what I'm seeing throughout the community, what I'm hearing throughout the community is a ton of positive feedback, not only on just the fact that we have that work going on and the investment back into the community, but a lot to do with how those crews are working within our community. Everything from the quality of the work to the cleanliness of the work to not necessarily being disruptive. So again, just a fantastic thing to see within our community. That type of activity just shows how bustling and how growing Stony Plain is, and I look forward to seeing that continue for quite some time. With that on our agenda, we do have no closed meeting items, so we'll move past that item, and I will transfer the chair back to Mayor Choi to close the meeting.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and good work chairing the Governance and Priorities meeting. And with that, so we move on to number 9 of our agenda, which is adjournment. So seeing that there's nothing else on the agenda and no hands raised, we're adjourned. Thank you.